So today, I'm joined by Mike Carr, a respected leader with nearly 3 decades of firefighting experience. Mike Carr served the St. John Fire Department, and he rose to the ranks and became a deputy fire chief and retired in 2022. Throughout his career, he worked as a firefighter, an instructional divisional chief, and a senior command officer. His experience includes rope rescue, confined space rescue, hazardous material response, incident command, and emergency management. He was also recognized for his contribution to emergency management within St. John. Today's conversation isn't about the position he held. It's about the lessons he's learned along the way with leadership, accountability, training, decision-making, and pressure, and what it takes to build strong firefighters and strong teams. Mike Carr, welcome to Built Under Pressure. It's an honor to have you. So today we have somebody that I really look up to. He's been a leader within the St. John Fire Department. He's been pivotal in starting up the rope rescue team. Is that correct?
That is correct,
Yeah.
yep.
And you've also done a lot of work with EMO throughout
Yep.
St. John. And were you awarded for that too?
The team was awarded.
Oh, the team.
So the St. John Emergency Manager, and that was primarily because 2018 was a pretty crazy year.
Yeah,
We had historical floods and industrial incidents, and yeah, it was pretty neat. Yeah.
And you were pretty big on starting all that too. Weren't you?
Well, we started the program, right? Mm-hmm. Like we started the program, and I think that's what's probably the most important is that everything's good in theory, but we actually got our reps in, and that made a big difference, right? So.
Yeah. So, and you also did some time in the military too?
I did some time in the military. Yeah, I was, I think it started off way back when I was a young pup. So 12, 13 years old, joined the Army Cadets. Okay. Pivotal on learning, right? Yeah. Discipline, all that stuff. Going away every summer. I wasn't home for a summer between being 12 and like 24 because I was always away on training, right? In some shape, way, or form. So did Army Cadets for 5 years. Unbelievable opportunities there. And then I was in the Royal Canadian Artillery Reserve, 3 Field Regiment, shout out. And 3 Field Artillery. Unbelievable, right? Great guys, did the stuff. Never deployed. That would probably be one of my only regrets is didn't deploy, but at the time it was pre 9/11, all the stuff, right?
Okay. So there's nothing really going on then. Okay.
Yeah, Bosnia was the hot ticket at the time.
Okay.
Yeah, and that and those that were involved in that can let you know that was pretty hot ticket.
Yeah,
for sure.
Actually my dad was over there.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
And then I guess we'll get into how you became a firefighter.
Ooh, so full disclosure, I never wanted to be a firefighter.
Oh.
I know it sounds weird, right?
Yeah.
But what happened is that like everything else, I was heavy in the military. I applied for RMC and Royal Military College, got accepted, and then denied it because I wanted to go to Montreal, and I went to McGill University instead, stayed in the reserve. But at the time, the only thing they were offering after you graduated from RMC was a real good job in combat arms, being a young lieutenant in the, either artillery, armored, or infantry. And at the time, I thought I was more important than that.
Yeah.
One of those pivotal turning points in my life. But when I went through university, afterwards, did a science degree in biology. And then after that, what happened was I was trying to get in the Mounties.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Trying to get into the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. And at the time was affirmative action. So I was doing good, but I never would have been good enough. I wasn't bilingual. There was it was really hard to get in back then. And there was a lot better people that were successful. So literally I'm working at the Cherrybrook Zoo in St. John, right?
Okay.
Feeding yaks and tigers, and love that job too. It's like working on a farm, except the animals eat you. Yeah. And after that, what ended up happening was, my father literally said, there was an ad in the paper and said, "Hey, did you ever want to be a firefighter?"
Oh.
And I was like, nah, I don't want to be on a fire because Rob Simons is my godfather.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah. Full disclosure. Now the world knows. And I was like, no, that's Rob's gig. right? That's, Rob, he's doing his thing. And he's like, well, why don't you go talk to Rob and just, so being my godfather. And he was like, well, yeah, he's, gave me some pretty good direction or whatever. And he just said, it's pretty competitive in there. And back then there was no fire schools.
Oh.
Right. So we were trained by the St. John Fire Department at the St. John Fire Department in Milledgeville, the old tower that was there. And I don't know if that was a better model than the ones we have now, because boy, did we ever learn a lot.
Yeah, I feel like you could probably burn a lot more out there than you could.
Yeah, but you're being taught by the people that you were going to work with too, right?
Yeah.
So what I found really neat about firefighting is literally the first time I was in a fire station was after I already met selection.
Okay.
I walked in and I went, and they started touring us around touring us around everything. And I was like, whoa, these are really big trucks. I drove military trucks. And I was like, these are big trucks. This is big stuff. These guys are, and it was, and then that was it. I couldn't look back. Yeah. Unbelievable. Unbelievable.
Like even with me, I didn't really plan on being a firefighter. I kind of got out of the military and was looking for something to do, and I actually went to Milledgeville Station and started talking to Scotty Somerville.
Oh yeah.
I spent time with him. I was like, yeah, I think this is what I want to
do. Yeah. It's unbelievable. And now, in full disclosure, I mean, we'll get to it in a little bit, I'm sure, but now my son is a firefighter in Fredericton.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
When did he get on?
Yeah, just this year. So, awesome. He did the full gamut, and that's a whole other story about, we're going to talk about leadership. That's wasn't a Prad down moment for me at all.
No.
But anyway, yeah, we'll get into that for sure. Yeah. But yeah, so after that, it was really that kind of set the path, right? Yeah. And then once you're in the, the fire service, man, like you can only connect the dots where you end up looking backwards, because you cannot predict at that time where you're going to go with it.
No, not at all.
Right?
Yeah.
You're just happy to go to a medical call when you first start.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? It's like, wow, the tone went off, medical call 5,372 after 15 years of service. It's not as exciting anymore.
No.
But anyway, so yeah, no, it's been quite a journey.
Yeah. And I guess I'll tell a little story about how I met you. So I think it was 2012. I was doing my OJT, and I believe we had a hazmat call out in St. Andrews.
Yep.
Yeah, remember that?
Yeah, I do.
Yeah, it ended up being a pretty tragic one. But I kind of remember on the way back, you kind of turned around and was like, "Hey, kid, how you doing?"
Yeah.
How you okay with seeing that? And I'm just like looking at what? You're like, oh yeah, you did all those tours in Iraq. That's not the first that person you see.
Yeah.
Laugh.
Yeah. But it's looking back, thinking about that now, and you're going, you know what? Like it all adds to, the whole other discussion of what you're exposed to over the course of your career, right?
Yeah.
And at the time, and you like to think that you're this old grizzled folk that basically you can are going to handle it or whatever. But are you really?
Yeah.
Are you really? That's another. I know that's another discussion.
Oh yeah, 100%. It definitely adds up.
Yeah, for sure.
So I know you ended up becoming a deputy chief within the fire department. You want to talk about how that happened, or? Yeah,
quite a journey. I'd never, when you come from the military background, that whole succession planning is normal, right?
Yeah.
You get 1 hook, 2 hook, 3 hook, then you get, and you work your way up, and then now you're RSM, or if you go the officer route, you're lieutenant captain, and it's just you naturally progress, and that's the way that you're retired. So I already assumed that would naturally progress.
Yeah.
But at no point in time, I'll tell you exactly why I became a chief officer was Peter Saab.
Okay. Yeah.
Right. Opportunity presented itself. Right. I was doing my APC stuff, and Peter Saab came to me and said, they're going to post a position for emergency management.
Okay.
And I'm the rope guy.
Yeah.
I'm like a tech rescue guy, right?
Yeah.
I'm like, how many kilonewtons of force does this beaner do guy?
Yeah.
And now you want me to do EMO, which is telling people to have like a 72-hour preparedness kit. And I was like, oh, that's not my gig at all, right?
Yeah.
Looking back now, I'm going, holy jumpins. That's like, that kind of changed my whole perspective on emergency services for sure. Yeah. Went through that process, and believe it or not, I failed my first interview.
Oh, really?
So not only was I the only candidate that applied, which is even worse. And then I failed my first interview.
Yeah.
And it required a second interview. And then I was like, wow, like, am I ready for this? Am I ready for this? That I can't even, I'm the only candidate and I didn't make it.
Yeah.
So I was like, oh boy, you know, I don't know if this is for me. And at the time, the deputy chief, I went in his office. I was like, I botched this. And he goes, I've been on probation my whole career, because every time you get a promotion in the fire service, you're on probation for 6 more months. I said, I've been on probation more than I've actually been. And he goes, don't worry about it.
Yeah.
So what they did is that, and I can look back, it was me not being professional. So I went in there thinking that I got this. I was overconfident. I was really like, at the interview, I was like leaning on the table and, hey, you know what I mean? Like, I was just like, because I work with these people all the time on projects and stuff like that from City Hall. For the record, HR is never your friend. No, I'm just teasing.
I figured that out.
But what they did is then they put me with one of their more experienced HR partners down there.
Okay.
And she demanded a certain level of professionalism just being in the room with her. Yeah. And it, you know what it did? It brought up my game. I prepared better. And at the end of the day, I was successful. Yeah. And I'm like, wow, that's a lesson learned right there. You're going to get to these things is that you can't be overconfident and roll into these thinking that they're going to hand it to you because you get the tap, right?
Just because somebody thinks, you have to definitely put the work in and prepare yourself for those kind of situations.
Yeah. There's no gimmies ever.
No. That's the thing about life. It'll kick you in the nuts.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah. So I guess as your, your responsibilities increase within the fire department, how'd that really change your perspective of leadership, I guess?
So you learn stuff that you were never privy to before.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That's the big thing. And then you have a different layer of responsibility, right? And I think, when you look back at it, when you're trying to kind of piece it all together after the fact, I mean, just for this interview, I wrote 18 pages of notes based off the questions you gave me that you made it. 18 pages. Wow. And I've had this interview in my conversation 100 times in my brain.
Yeah.
I'm in the shower and I'm thinking about what would he say, and it's, but what I kind of brought it back to was when you have a higher level of responsibility, you have different priorities. And when you have different priorities, it doesn't necessarily align from where you came from.
Yep.
Right? So if a lieutenant comes into my office as the deputy chief and says like, hey, Dep, the toilet upstairs we got to jiggle the handle on the toilet. And you're looking at him like, are we really having this conversation right now? Because I'm going to a budget meeting to make sure that we can maintain the staffing that we have right now. And you're bugging me with a toilet handle
that he should be probably looking after.
Right. And you're going, wow. So I guess what happens is that, and, I like this example, Save a Private Ryan, right? Mm-hmm. You gripe up, you don't gripe down.
Yeah.
So all the problems and all the stuff that you get as a leader, you're not going to the people that you're leading, that you're supporting and dumping all yours on them. No. That's not good leadership.
No, it's not.
Right. It's not. And so what happens though, when it goes to the communication side, is that they don't know what you're actually dealing with. Mm-hmm. Right. Not to the level, right? Because a lot of it, there has to be some professional discretion there. So as a leader, as you grow up and your responsibilities grow, you're in bigger rooms with bigger problems, with fish. A lot more of complexity, right? Yeah, and there's a whole bunch of different people that are deciding what the outcome is going to be.
That's understandable. As you get up that higher in that rank, there's different things that a lot of us don't see. Yeah.
No, that's right. And should you be sheltered from it? I'm not sure. And but I think the main themes of what you're dealing with probably should be. Because everybody holds their context as the priority.
Exactly.
Right? So if you're a ladder guy, You're worried about K-12s and, ladders and, you're being a truckie and all that, whatever that is, right? Yeah. And then, when you're on the engine company, you're a hose guy. And when you're a squad guy, you're a prima donna, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because, right? As the boys in Group 3 used to say, is like, here come the squad prima donnas, right?
We call it the turnaround truck.
Yeah, exactly, right?
Yeah.
But when you look at it, and I did 10 years on the squad, and there was nobody prouder than I was to be on the rescue squad, right? Mm-hmm. But the thing is that your perspective is your priority, mm-hmm. right? But what happens is that as you move up the chain of command, your responsibilities increase exponentially, right? And that's what the biggest, hardest thing about leadership is prioritize and execute. Mm-hmm. What is a priority? Yeah. Because the problems are going to keep rolling in. It's a conveyor belt. Yeah. You don't get to do them. It's like whack-a-mole, and then you have to decide which one is a priority. Which one do we put our efforts towards? 100%. And that's hard to do, right?
Yeah. And I guess that'd be the next question is, I guess when you were a firefighter, what did you think good leadership looked like?
Traditional leadership is what I always looked at back then. I was very fortunate, right? I was just coming in at the end of all my officers. We still had a couple veterans, mm-hmm. From World War II, right?
Oh, wow.
Yeah. We had a lot of them were my officers, or even actually firefighters at that time, went through the war years, the urban renewal years, where they were literally driving by a fire to go to another fire. Now, think about that, right? Yeah. And they learned from a lot of experience, like air packs, no air packs. Like they went through that whole crazy transition from high boots and, and leather men to SCBAs and gas detection and hazmat. And they went through that transitional period. So they were traditional leaders, gotcha. Right? No problem speaking their mind, they were just strong men that were confident based off their experiences. And they were hard men too. Yeah. And that was like, wow. Like, you know what I mean? It's like when I grow up, I want to be like that, yeah. And they didn't back down this stuff and none of the other problems. Now there's a whole other area, but traditional leadership is what I've always kind of gravitated towards, okay. Right? Yeah. The stoic leader standing on the mountain said, follow me and we're going into battle type guys. You know what I mean?
Yeah, leading from the front, kind of being
absolutely
being the guy with his nose and everything. Not micromanaging, but more.
No.
Or just being there with the guys and the stuff with them.
Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. The challenge though is that the proper leadership for today?
That's a good question. It is.
Right?
Is it? Yeah.
Right? Because I think traditional leadership in the fire service that I aspired to back in the day, mm-hmm. you were just the best at what everybody else was doing. You were the best firefighter, mm-hmm. right?
Yep.
So you were good on the you were good on the fire. You were a good driver. You were a good lieutenant. You were a good. And then when you were the PC out there, right? And I remember seeing PCs that wore their dress, like they used to wear their dress uniform when they worked.
Oh, really?
Right. And they were commanding fires with their forge cap and their gold on their thing with the radio. And those guys, right, were the best at what they did. They were the toughest. They were the best. They were, you know what I mean? So you couldn't dispute their decision making mm-hmm. because they were better than you.
Yeah.
But those aren't the challenges now. The challenges in the fire service today are not being the best firefighter because you're in a different room where people don't care you're a firefighter anymore.
No, it's more political.
Exactly. Yeah. And there's bigger challenges there. Yeah. But that's something to revisit for sure.
Yeah, we could visit that if you wanted to.
Yeah.
And I definitely think it's, the old school ways definitely need to, maybe not completely get rid of them, but they definitely have to evolve and change from, the fire service now. So.
Yeah. But here's something that's interesting too, right? Is that if you want street cred mm-hmm. as a leader, you got to be good at what you do.
Mm-hmm. You have to be. Yeah.
Right? You know what I mean? And what does that mean is that I can't expect a crew to go up and vent a roof, right? Mm-hmm. If I'm, if I never worked on a ladder company before.
No, I guess you got to have that competence of it, the competency or
Right.
Yeah.
So when guys are looking at you, when guys are actually, when you go up there and you're asking guys to do stuff, there should be some level of competency that you've done that in the past that they can say, oh yeah, he used to know what he was doing. Right.
Just winging it
or read it in a book.
Yeah.
Right. Or watched a YouTube video or whatever. And that's what amazes me now about the firefighters that come here. They have so much access to information is that they're 10 times better than we ever could have been. And you know what? And now it's just because they have access to this stuff where we used to read Firehouse magazine.
Yeah. And
right.
Now you can just look it up on your phone. And
yeah. I want to know how to, put up a 24 by myself, against the building and, and all that stuff, they can show you how to do it with one hand with a special knot and a this and a that. And they're always challenging each other to make it better too. Right. And that's the difference. But I think when it comes back to the leadership standpoint is that you do have to have a level of competency as a leader and competency that I learned. And this is going back to work safe definition, right? Because everybody's like, what is competency? Competency isn't the minimum requirement. That's whatever there's. If I went up to say, Lucas, you're a very competent firefighter. You're like, thanks. You know what I mean? Like, what does that mean? But competency by definition is your training, your knowledge, and your experience combined into one. And most of us have 2 out of 3.
Yeah.
Right? So you can be super book smart, right? Have all the training in the world and not have a lot of experience, or you can have a lot of experience, a little bit of training, but you want to get dummied, right? Because I volunteer now, right? And you want to get dummied, ask a volunteer about their truck.
Oh,
they know pump pressures, they know how this, they know that, they know 10 times more. Where before it was just a tool. When I was a career firefighter, right? You pull the lever, water comes out, but you know where I want to be? I want to be in there.
To be inside,
and I don't want to be here. But they are true enthusiasts about what they're doing, and they know everything about it. And there's so much to learn by that, because I think you need all 3 to be competent. You need all 3 to be a competent leader, right? And so you can be. And so here's a question I wanted to ask you. From the military, right? So this happens in other fire services across the pond, right? But they have direct entry.
Okay.
So in the Canadian military, right from the gate, you can make the decision. Do you want to go the officer route, or do you want to go the enlisted route?
Oh, okay.
Right? So you don't have to be a sergeant for 15 years before you become a lieutenant.
No. You probably have schooling or anything for a lieutenant too, or no?
Well, absolutely. Yeah. But it's a whole different career trajectory, right? So right off the bat, so when you see you see the films or whatever, or the young snotty-nosed lieutenant, right? And you're looking at it and you're just going, how can there be a 20-year-old lieutenant and a 35-year-old grizzled up sergeant, and the lieutenant's telling them what to do? Is because they have different jobs, right? So in the fire service, it's seniority based. Yeah. So you have to work your way up through the ranks. And then as you work your way up through the ranks, which is good, you gain that experience. But you're gaining experience as a firefighter, not gaining experience as a command officer or as a lieutenant. So you're really, really good at operating a hose, but that doesn't necessarily mean you're going to be a good safety officer, because, maybe you're a rogue.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And when you're in command, you have different priorities that you have to execute on the fire ground that you wouldn't have as a firefighter.
Yeah, there's a lot more responsibility, a lot more things you got to look after and keep track of.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Accountability and where your firefighters are, what they're doing. You got to keep your eyes on this, the building and see what it's what it's doing. And I think it's a lot more pressure being in the higher up leadership than it is just being a driver of a truck. That's for sure. Yeah,
but I mean, unbelievable responsibility, and that comes back to the whole team thing, and that's the whole idea, is that everybody, and I mean, we can lead. There's no more metaphors in the world than there is for leadership, right? Lead from the front and all this stuff. But, leadership is really, really, I think it's easy in principle. It's just really hard to execute.
Yes. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Leadership is really hard to execute. And I think the principles of it, I can walk up to anybody, and say, give me 10 good things about a leader. And they'll just think of somebody in their head, right? And they'll say, oh yeah, like lead by example.
Give the good characteristics of that person.
Absolutely. Yeah. You know what I mean? But doing it, that's a whole other thing. Right.
And actually, the funny thing, I guess, going back to the whole, you have a snot-nosed lieutenant and everything like that. I was just having this conversation with my dad the other day, actually.
Yeah.
And I was like, why is it always, you get those young guys right out of university that are making these big calls, but then you have that senior sergeant there why isn't he not in charge of the platoon?
Right.
And more than the lieutenant, maybe it should be the other way around. I was kind of talking with my dad because, even within the military, I had a bad lieutenant when I was in my deployment, but I also had a bad sergeant too. So you know what I mean? But
yeah.
And I don't know where I'm going with that,
but here's the thing, right? So, why is not the most experienced person in charge?
Yeah.
It's just because they have different roles. Yeah. They have different responsibilities, right? And I remember being at a fire across from Fives, actually, right? And the lieutenant came up to me, who was on ladder 5, and looked me right in the eye and said, because I was a brand new acting platoon chief, right? And he came right up to me and said, hey, right? You watch that building. We don't know what's going on. We're inside. Your job is to keep us safe from the outside and let us know what's going on. And I went, Yeah. So my job's not to throw the ladders, shoot the water, search for people. My job is to make sure that the conditions in the environment and the resources are available for those that are doing it. And what I learned very, very quickly is that the eyes tell everything. So I used to go and I used to stand right out front when I was in command, right? Or even if I wasn't in command, right? If I was just on scene. And I would go and watch the officer come out and rip off their mask. And I would know whether or not we had it or not.
Okay.
So if you had your experienced captains and your officers come out and they rip their mask off and they're just like, well, that wasn't very much fun, then okay, it was a squib. They got it, no problem. But when they come out and they're wound up and the snot's flowing and they're like, I need more men, I got to get in there. And then you're going, okay, we don't have this, right? And that's a whole other different thing. But, the reality is that you really have to learn as a leader is to let the leader, and this is Stanley McChrystal's team of teams, you got to make sure that you are listening to those officers because those officers are inside. They know what's going on. They know what the conditions are. But your job as the incident commander on scene is that you have 4 or 5 officers that all have different perspectives of the fire because they're all fighting separate fires with separate tasks. And your idea is that you have to bring all 5 of those, what they're telling you, together to get the big picture.
Yeah. So in a way, you almost have to step back and see the full picture of everything.
You have to see the full picture.
You got to be able to put those different perspectives together to lay out what you're really going to do.
Yeah. So, if I go as a guy, go and search. I mean, we've done, we always do search, attack, search, backup, and whatever it is. We always do those tasks.
Yeah.
But the reality is that it might be really easy. It might be a real easy search job. Everybody was kind of accounted for. You're doing your primary search. Everything's clear. It is what it is, right?
Yeah.
But you know what? Meanwhile, the guys on Division 2 are getting the snot kicked out of them because it went up the wall. It's in the attic. And now those crews, so that crew coming out is going, yeah, search complete. We're all good. Right? And you're like, great. Those guys up there, not so much. And getting the big picture and understanding the whole thing, I think, is really important. And that's what the leader has to do, because there's many things going on. And this comes down to like good old fashioned span of control, right? How many balls can you juggle before you start dropping them?
Yeah.
Right.
Before things start falling apart.
Absolutely. And the leader's responsibility is maintain that span of control, but you also have to let go. And that's the hardest thing to do as a leader, is let go what you were good at in the past in order to be successful today.
Yeah. You got to kind of really rely on those officers to do what they're supposed to and make the right decisions when you're not
Absolutely.
And not being over their shoulder doing it for them, kind of thing.
No. And you got to let them do it their way. And that's hard to do. That's hard to do as a dad.
Oh yeah.
Right? I was bad dad this week. 100%. Full disclosure. Right? My youngest son came in 100%. We got our load of wood, right? And of course, me, a little bit OCD going on there. Well, you got to put the tarp in this direction so the grommets are on this size. And you know why? Because I've screwed it up a million times before. So I've got it nailed down that this is how I do it. You know what I did? He did half the pile in 2 hours. That took me 2 days. Yeah. Right? You know what I mean? So instead of being thankful, I was like, oh, Like, how come you didn't put this and the tarp this way and the ramp like this and this and that? And the wheelbarrow goes on the left side of the pile, not on the right side of the pile. You know, and instead of just saying, wow, dude, thank you so much. You saved me a ton of work, immediately went into the details. And I just went, right? Yeah, like, you know, and, you know, immediately caught myself and said, I'm a dick, right? Yeah. Gave him a hug, apologized. And I said, thank you so much for helping me. And I'm going, there's your officer. Yeah. There's your officer, right? Does it really matter if you wash the left side of the truck first or the right side of the truck? No, maybe you always went on the left-hand side because that's where the hose reel is and that's where you should start. It only makes sense. But at the end of the day, if the truck's clean, does it really matter? No. It doesn't matter. And letting go as a leader is so hard because, you know, you get to these leadership positions because you're probably good at what you did and what worked for you, but that's not the same anymore. No. Those things change over time. The environment changes, the condition changes, what we do changes, tactics change, equipment change, people change. And you have to say, no, you know what? I just have to point and shoot. Lucas, take your crew, search that building.
Go after it again.
And I'm going, well, I always go left-hand search. Now you don't even do that anymore. Oh. You know what I mean? Left-hand search, right-hand search. You know, we always did that, you know, but that stuff's not applicable anymore. So what you got to do is think about, you have to stay at the strategic level and that's the big thing. You have to stay at the strategic level and you have to say, you know what? I need that building search, boys. That's our priority. Go.
Get her done.
And if they're not successful, it's your fault because either you didn't convey exactly how you wanted the end result to be, not the tactic on how they do it. Okay. Guys, I need this done in 5 minutes. Yep. And if they're not successful, it's because you either didn't give them clear direction or you didn't resource them properly. You set them up for failure because there's no way that one crew can do this in 5 minutes. No. Right?
Oh, and then that comes back to, you know, taking responsibility as a leader for everything that happens. So.
Everything.
Yeah, everything, right? Everything.
And you know what I mean, you know, and it's funny, like when you first send me all the questions to kind of go through this, and I'm sitting there, my mind's racing, and I'm looking at the books up here, and I'm going, I have all those books, right? You know, and I'm sitting there going, you know, Jocko, right?
Yeah, and I've read them. I've read all those ones, yeah.
Right? You know what I mean? Big fan. You know why? Because he takes the onus and puts it back on the leader. Said, you know what? Something screwed up. It's your fault. Yep. Figure it out. Yep. Right? And you're like, oh, really? And then he gives examples, right? He gives examples about every time that something fails, it's your fault. You're the leader. So you didn't train them properly. You didn't resource them properly. You never gave them opportunity for growth. You never gave them opportunities to trip and fall and figure it out and get that experience. That's your fault. You're the leader, right? And if you're not giving those leadership opportunities for them to grow and get their competency of training, knowledge, and experience, then you're failing as a leader. Because it's all your fault regardless. Yeah. You are the responsible one. Yeah. And that's what's key about it. And so when I look at those, I was like, whoa, okay. Yeah. This is really, really interesting. Yeah. Right? And now that, you know, so if you look on my phone right now and you look at all my podcasts, right? You know, Simon Sinek, right? You know, Jocko, Bené Brown, Adam Grant, you know, you just can go through all of them. And it's just like, and I always like, you know, maybe it's because of my military background, but I always like military examples of leadership because they're always in very, very extreme examples because they're always life or death situations, right? You know, if you're doing leadership because you get a project, you know, I work in the private sector now, right? So if you don't get your project on time, you know, that will have implications on you as a professional, but nobody's going to die. No. Right. And that's why military or first responder examples of leadership are so important, is because the consequences are the highest consequences you can have. Yeah. Right?
It's people's lives,
People's lives. Yeah, and that's 100%, right? Either short-term or long-term effects. Yeah. Right. Yeah. So I'm sure those cards are right off the rings of Saturday now because I keep adding them.
Oh, no, it's all
like my wife said, she goes, does Lucas know that he's going to put a quarter in you? Right? And you're just going to talk. Yeah. I said, not only do I think he's going to put a quarter, I think he has a whole roll of quarters. So she's like,
it's okay. I don't mind. This is the point of it. I just want to share and, you know, give something back to, you know, maybe younger firefighters, and maybe they want to take those leadership roles, or, you know what I mean, and give something back to them.
100%. Yeah.
So what kind of weaknesses did you have to overcome?
Ooh. There's a long list. And I'm probably the best part about that, and this is why I want to thank you so much for this opportunity, to be honest, is because it really made me reflect. Yeah. It really made me reflect. And it's like, you know what? First thing, probably right off the bat was I have very, very high expectations, right? So the wood, right? And that's my son, right? You know, here's a full grown man who's a professional firefighter. And I gave him the goof look because he didn't do it exactly the way that I wanted to do. Or when you're mowing the lawn and they leave those nice strips all the way up and down. And I would go up and I'd fix them when the kids were young and they were mowing the lawn. So instead of being happy that they're mowing the lawn for me, I'd go back and I'd have to fix it all up because it wasn't exactly the way that I wanted. Yeah. And so when you had these crazy high expectations, right? You know, one chief used to say, it's great to have high expectations, just don't drown in the disappointment. Yeah. And I was like, well, what do you mean? And I think that when you want, and I use this as an example, but, you know, not everybody's a Navy SEAL. No. Right? You know, and that's just obviously the example of excellence, right? And so when I want people to be, you know, because I held myself to such high expectations in everything that I'd done, is that I expect everything from the same. So when I would be, you know, when I want something done and it was like a B-, I would be just so distraught as a leader that all I'm doing is correcting all the time instead of encouraging.
Yeah, encouraging and mentoring and.
Right. Yeah. And that was probably a big thing for me too, is that it's having that and being impatient, right? Mm-hmm. Things take time. People take time to learn. And that's not how I ever held myself accountable. Mm-hmm. You know, myself was like, you know, like if I have to know how to do, you know, artificial high directional off the side of a thing, then I would study that nonstop until I got that down, and I would lose sleep over it until I figured that problem out. But not everybody's like that. No. And I think that managing expectations it was really, really hard for me to do as a leader. Mm-hmm. And the other thing is you don't have all the tools, right? You can't be the best at everything all the time. Yeah. There's a couple things that I gravitated towards that I may, you know, some people may or may not say that I was good at, but that's because I was interested in it, not because I was good at it. It was just because I had an interest in it. So I studied more and I practiced more and whatever it is. And it could be anything from emergency management to being a rope geek to whatever it is, right? Yeah. Hazmat weenie, right? Nobody likes to do hazmat, but we used to do hazmat and we used to love it, right? Yeah. You know, so, but, and then all of a sudden you realize very quickly, you know, if I had to come back to some of the things that absolute failure as a leader is that I was really not a very good people person. Like, I like to joke around with the men, like to do stuff, you know, and, you know, nothing made me smile more when the guys were, you know, kicking the shit out of a structure fire and I'm coming out and I'm slapping asses and, you know what I mean? It's just like, you know, you just scored the touchdown and I'd be so happy. And then, but that's not, you know, as a leader, then the other stuff comes, right? Horrible at mental health. I was absolutely horrible at mental health. Never got it. Took all the training, did all this stuff, never clicked with me. I'm not your guy. Yeah. And being able to understand that and be able to say, you know what? We do have somebody that does have those skills that's going to be able to walk you through this. I was in charge of the return to work program for the St. John Fire Department, where my own kids would break their arm and my wife and I are the same. It was like, get up. Right. You know what I mean? And, yeah. Come on. What's wrong with you? Right. Yeah. You know, you don't miss school because you have a fever of 104. What's wrong with you? Suck it up. Right. Yeah. And I think that there's so many different parts of being a leader that are important that I think, you know, if I was going to say what would be like the ideal job for me of looking backwards, you know, to being like a chief of special operations or something, that would probably be in my forte. But all that other stuff, they wouldn't even invite me to do contract negotiations, right? They were scared what I was going to say, right? Or, you know, dealing with counsel, it's great if you want me to go down there, rub elbows and make relationships, no problem at all. But, you know, you want to have an effective budget process, a lot better people at it than I was. So I guess what I learned is you can't be good at everything over time. And I really learned that I had a lot of deficiencies when it comes to those higher positions that I may not have in the past. Okay. Right. And I think that's hard, but I didn't really know them at the time. Yeah. Because you're trying to be all things to all people. Yeah, and I think that and you just can't. No, you can't, and you got to identify. Know your strengths, work with them, right? Yep. You know,
and I think that's another thing with leadership is finding those people that can fill those gaps of your weakness that you can. Yeah,
Yep. And in my new role in the private sector, everybody that I deal with is smarter and more experienced in what we do than me.
Yeah.
So I really have to lean on them. I really have to trust them. I really have to say, hey guys, here's our direction moving forward. We got to get this done. And then the best thing I can do is get out of their way.
Yeah.
The joke is at work now is that when I go in, it's like, wow, we got so much done because you weren't here. Yeah.
It's funny. Yeah. So you pretty much just point them in the direction and let them kind of do it.
And support them.
Yeah.
Check in, make sure they have the resources, make sure if they need support or they need any, they're lacking something or, making sure that you're advocating for them. And I think that that's really, really important. And they call me, and you may not know that, but they call me Herb Tarlick at work now as an emergency manager, right? Okay. Herb Tarlick was the greasy salesman from WKRP in Cincinnati, which used to be a sitcom, right? And that's my job, is to go in, make those relationships, find out where the real direction, what we really need to get done, make sure that, when things aren't as smooth, as I go in and smooth them over, make those initial engagements and foster those relationships long-term to make sure that we're reaching out and stuff like that. Yeah. And that's a different role, but that is absolutely a leadership role. But I did have a question, and that's, what do you think a leader is?
Ooh, so I think a leader is somebody that definitely sees the bigger picture in things. I think it's somebody that leads from the front and is able to direct people, but not micromanage them, but be able to guide and mentor and teach them and direct them in the right, where they need to go, point them in the right way.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Kind of it's like the art of influence, right?
Yeah.
But can you, and I thought about this afterwards, like, if you're a bad leader, are you a leader? So, like, you know what I mean? Yeah, because to me, leader has always been a positive thing. And that's why I feel like a total, fraud, right? People would say, like, well, you were a leader or this, a leader or that. And I was like, I don't know if I was a leader or not, because a leader means that there was a positive outcome. And if there's a positive outcome, that comes to the people that you are working for, that judge you on whether or not you had a successful outcome or not. So the people that are reporting to you or you're supporting, they're the ones who are judge whether or not you're a leader or not, because to me, you're not a bad leader. Either you're not a leader. Yeah. So if you're bad, you're not a leader, because it's supposed to have positive outcome. And I think that those people have to be empowered to move forward. And it's a theoretical debate, but to me, I don't think anybody who is in a leadership position isn't necessarily a leader.
No, not at all.
Right? Because they're, they might be a really good chief officer or lieutenant on the truck, but they may not be a leader. No. They're good because they're good for managers. Lieutenants on the truck that do all the ticky boxes, they're great for us because they get everything done that you want to, but they may not have a good relationship with their crew.
Yeah, I've seen that a lot too in the department. They're great firefighters. They know a lot, but their people skills aren't the greatest. So,
yeah, and that's all part of it. That's all part of it.
So as you kind of you climb the ranks and you get in those top positions, do you kind of lose sight of what the guys in the ground see?
100%.
Yeah.
And we look back, what are the regrets? What are the regrets? Yeah. Right? When you look back, because it's always good to be the Monday morning quarterback on yourself.
Yeah, 100%.
Steve Jobs said you can only connect the dots looking backwards. And if you think about it, you're going, he's absolutely right. Because my career was a total plinko board, right? I didn't know where I was going to end up at the end of it. But when I look back, probably one of the regrets was the fact that I didn't spend as much time as I wanted to with the firefighters.
Okay.
And then you lose
a bit of touch of what's going on.
You're out of touch. Yeah. And when I thought about this, I was like, you know what? But where do you get the time to do that? Right? So I used to focus. So what I did is that I knew that I couldn't go out and reach out to, at the time when I was the deputy, we had a 2 deputy system where I did platoon 1 and 3. and I had EMO and fire prevention and fire prevention and investigation, and the other deputy had 2, 4. I think he had fleet and training.
Yeah.
Right. So we divided, and it worked really, really good because we came from different backgrounds. Right. And you know, I was already the EMO guy, so it made sense. And the other deputy, he was already a training chief, so it all made sense. So it kind of made sense. But there's no way that if you did your rounds like a platoon chief's supposed to do, which is really hard to do, by the way, in a 24-hour shift,
it is, yeah.
Is that you do lose connectivity, right? So the reality is, what is the responsibility of the deputy chief? Well, the responsibility of the deputy chief, believe it or not, is to support the platoon chiefs. And the platoon chief's responsibility, support the officers. And the officers are to support the men, the firefighters, right? Yeah. So what does that mean? Right. So, yeah, it's good that, you know, that do those town halls where you sit at the kitchen table and all this other stuff. But when you're doing that, which is great, and you're building those relationships and you're hearing the feedback, what ends up happening is that you're not doing your job. Yeah. Right. You're not doing your job. Yeah. Right. Because guess what? Those emails are coming in. That council report has to get done. You know, the specs on the new apparatus are still sitting there waiting for your approval. And all that stuff that is your Monday to Friday is not being done because you're engaging the men. So what a lot of guys did, you know, including myself, is that you knock off and then you'd stop at a fire station on the way home. And then your wife is going, who's the other chief, and she's sitting there going like, really? You knocked off at 5, you're home at 7. And so balancing that, I think, is really, really hard. And it's one of the things that I think you can't do it all. You have to manage that. But if you are supporting your chief officers, then if you go to the lieutenants, they should be happy because they are supporting the lieutenants. Okay. And if I go to a firefighter and they are happy, not happy, I should say, but they are, say, their concerns are being heard and they feel supported in what they're doing and they're getting all this other stuff, that means there's a lieutenant there that's making that happen. And I think if everybody stays in their lane, then the system works in theory. In theory. But, you know, the background stuff, and like I said, I use that example, is like, you know, when the toilet handle doesn't work and firefighter A goes right to the deputy chief because they used to be buddies and work on the truck together.
Skipping the chain of command.
Command, then that's great. But you have to realize, like, well, why doesn't he care? He doesn't care. It's not that they don't care, is that they have a different level of responsibilities that aren't any less important. No. They're just bigger and different. And I think everybody but you have to convey that. You have to communicate that, what that is. And I think that's one of the big things is losing that disconnect and losing that perspective of the firefighters. Now, I have a solution. Ooh, okay. The biggest solution is, I believe, which nobody has time to do. Now, I say that, you know, in the volunteer department that I'm with now, does it.
And that's Wellsford?
Grand Bay, Westfield. Yeah, Westfield. And they are amazing. And my role there is to help with training. I'm not the training officer. I just help. Yeah. I just show up and say, look, I got all this stuff in my brain. I can't get rid of it. Please help me. Right. I got to let it out. And when we go there, and what we've done with them on a regular basis, that is really hard to do in a career fire department, is they do full scale exercises that you just can't, right? So if you really want to build that competency and really understand how things are going at your primary role, which is fighting fires, right? And going to emergency calls, not griping about, you know,
toilet seats or
right? You know, then what ends up happening is that doing that training together, right? Those large scale events, like, and we've done that when we brought in incident command, and the chief officers at the time were pivotal on teaching us what incident command was. And so we used to go and have 4 crews doing 4 different assignments, and, you know, all the benchmarking and talking and all the stuff that we learn in the standard. And when you have everything from, you know, a deputy doing safety and you have the platoon chief as in command, and then you have another platoon chief in charge of logistics, and then you have all the firefighters and the crews, and you're doing your thing. It comes back to proving your competency, but you're going to be able to get a good feeling about how everybody's skill sets are and what they need. And if there's a crew that's not up to snuff, it's your fault.
Yeah.
Right? Because that means that are there, and maybe your doctrine is wrong. Right? And what I'm saying is, like, when we exercise, doesn't matter if I exercise in my current role or we exercise back in the day, when you exercise, the individuals don't fail. It highlights failures in the system. It means that they haven't had the opportunities for training. They haven't had the opportunities to practice. How many times did we learn a new skill or new something? You learn it once, and 6 months later, trying to zero that gas monitor that they just got from a different industry, and then you're going, wow, these are all different buttons. That doesn't look like the green one that we used to have, right? Now it's an orange one, right? And if you don't have that opportunity to practice those skills, but at the same time is that, everybody is good at their individual skill sets, but any weaknesses is magnified when it's compounded together. Right? Yeah. So if you do those full scale exercises, if you do those, then that gives the deputy chief the opportunity to reconnect back to the men because he's participating in the incident. Yeah. And like I said, Full Metal Jacket, right? The character mother, right? Yeah. Don't worry, he's fine. We just need somebody to throw grenades at him for the rest of his life, right? And that's what firefighters are, right? Worst thing that can happen to firefighters is that there's no fires. Right? Then they're just like labs that haven't been walked. They get into your trash, right? You know what I mean? And then they're worried about bootlaces and silly stuff that's not important. But if they are, the best thing for morale in the fire service is have a good banger, right? You have a good fire. And even if you're cleaning up 2 weeks later, you're still telling stories about this or that. And then everybody's motivated and you're getting into it and everything is really, really good. And I think if you can match that in the training spectrum, what ends up happening is that that's a really good opportunity for your leadership to reconnect because they have a role. And if they're not good at what to do, they're not going to shine in front of the firefighters. And I think it's just a layer of transparency on skill sets.
Yeah, right? It really exposes the holes and things. Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
That's a good
because all those things have to work at the same time together in order to be successful. Yeah. And those are an example of how a department should operate is that you have multiple parts that have to work together for the collective in order for it to be successful.
Yeah. Actually, it's kind of something that kind of popped in my head, kind of off topic. So I was kind of on Instagram. I think there was a divisional chief talking about how he went in with his guys and was fighting the fire with them. And I was like, I kind of got in an argument with him. I was like, you're in the wrong, man. like you should have been outside overlooking the scene and maybe that's a good opportunity to train with the men so you can see things like that. But I kind of got in an argument with online saying, hey, you should have been outside doing your job, not inside. And I don't know where I'm going with that.
No, and we explored that model, and the reality is we just don't have the depth.
No,
right. And what I mean is that, imagine having the opportunity of somebody inside the building, like a platoon chief, that their role is not touch hose, not pull ceilings, not do search, but just monitor conditions inside for safety purposes and making sure that, we're not really advancing as quickly as we should down this hallway. Like we're going to need more resources. And now the officer who's trying to, back up the nozzleman, who's trying to talk on his radio at the same time because he's trying to do that. And if you had somebody was a little bit disconnected from that, Jocko uses the example of porting your arms, right? Yeah. If you're a leader and you're looking through the site, you're not seeing the big picture. No. And I agree with that. And how do we do that? How do we do that? The problem is that we're a small department. Yeah. And when you're a small department and there's only one white helmet on scene, and if they're inside, you don't have command. No. And the best place for that person is on the outside. But if this is a larger department where multiple white helmets are showing up, first guy, going in to monitor safety, and as long as you have a couple outside that's doing exterior safety and command and logistical support or whatever, and if you had those resources, I think it's actually a really neat model. Yeah. But if you're the only commander on scene and you're inside, you're looking through the site, and that's going to get somebody killed. Yeah,
100%. Yeah, that's kind of what I was getting with it, and it would be nice to have, maybe another officer or chief maybe actually inside overlooking everything and kind of maybe giving that little relief to the officers.
Yeah, for sure.
So there was any so as you became a leader, was there anything that maybe the old version of Mike wouldn't have liked about yourself?
Yeah, like I said, the jury is out whether or not I was a good leader or not.
I think
but when I went into a leadership
yeah.
position, one of the things is I think my regret is still very operationally focused, and I think you have to have a wider spectrum when you get up to the higher levels of command. Right? And you don't have that opportunity. So when you see, when I look back, I don't think, I didn't aspire to move up and start getting extra bars on my shoulder. That's not what it is, right? Ideal situation, like the best job in the world, captain of a house, right? Why? You get nothing to prove anymore. Your ego's in check because you're the guy. You lasted the longest, right? It's your house. You're respected because of your years of service. Old bull, young bull, you don't have to run anymore because you know what's going to do. So while the young guy's up and down those stairs 3 times, you just brought the tool the first time and went upstairs and hammered it, right? And so I think that, being in that position, but going back to, and I was like, when I look at how I operated as a leader, is that I like to have fun and be in the firehouse and do the pranks and do this and do that or whatever. And I think at the end of the game, it's pretty serious, dude.
Yeah.
And I think that, it's hard to do both. It's hard to be familiar with the men, and then in the next minute because traditionally the deputy is like the sergeant major. So you're the one that's responsible for maintaining doctrine, right? You know what I mean? So you're walking out on the floor and, some guy's wearing a ZZ Top t-shirt and you're just like, what are you doing? What? So it's hard to be the good guy and the bad guy at the same time. So, I think at the end of it, it was like, but I think it's all situationally based. And I think that's it's things change when you get into different positions, right?
Yeah, they do.
Unfortunately.
I've noticed that when I was pretty early in my career in the Marine Corps. I got thrown in a leadership position at a pretty young age, and it definitely changes the outlook on a lot of things.
Well, you're responsible, right? Before, when it's just yourself, and when you talk about, say guys that are bangers, right? The term at St. John is like, if you're a banger, you're going to go in there. But that's great. That's great that you're a banger, and that's good. But that doesn't shun your duties from doing housework. Just because you're good at going to your one of fire a week or whatever, whatever truck you're working on that's busy or not busy, doesn't mean that you're not responsible for mowing the lawn. You know what I mean? And I think as your responsibilities change over time, I think that you have to kind of address those, but they're compounded, right? So when you're responsible for people, it kind of takes the ha-ha out of it.
You gotta take it seriously because people's lives are in your hands.
Right. And then you try to do this whole buddy to boss thing that everybody talks about too, right? Because you can't be their friend and their officer at the same time. And people are just like, well, yeah, you can. But so I always use this example. I said, so here's the thing, right? So it's after the fire, right? It's all done. You're doing cleanup or whatever. And I used to walk over because I'd see newer lieutenants and they'd be rolling hose with the men. And I'd be like, what are you doing? Right. And they're like, well, I'm helping roll hose because I want to show that, I'm willing to still get my hands dirty. And then I said, one of these guys get clipped by a car. I said, that's 100% your fault because your job is to oversight while these guys had their head down rolling hose. You're supposed to make sure the scene remains safe.
Yep.
Right?
I agree with that.
And he's like, oh, I never thought about it like that. So, yeah, in the situation where you're back at the firehouse and hey, if you want to help squeegee the floor, that's fine too.
Yeah.
Absolutely. But not at the detriment of not doing what your real responsibility is making sure that your firefighters are trained properly and they're fit and they're prepared to go and you're practicing because there's always something around. And at the end of the day, and they're safe. And at the end of the day, all those ticky boxes are good. They can go help squeegee the floor.
Yeah. I think it's what an officer should be doing is mentoring and looking out for the safety of their men and overseeing the bigger pictures.
And we had really good, because we didn't really have a really good, say, development program, right? Because most people don't, right? What did you do is you learn from an IFSTA manual on how to be a company officer or whatever, and it's very theoretical, right? But one of the things that I found that was really interesting about that was that we had officers that would go, You're writing your roster next year? Yeah. You know what? All right. Hop up in the seat. And so the calls that had less consequences, right?
Yeah, they let you kind of.
You know what I mean? They would actually let you go up and sit in the seat, and they would sit in the back, right? Yeah. Go ahead, and if you need anything, I'm right here. And I'm going, wow.
Yeah, and that should be this should be that way, I believe.
Yep. Yeah. But then you have people that can't let go.
Yeah,
right.
True too.
And I look at that. It's like it's this era of entitlement, right? You know what I mean? You know, and I'm looking at one of those books. I was like, I was going to mention that, right? Yeah. But leaders eat last, right? You know, Simon said it. Great book, made a lot of sense. But you know what? That's an old concept.
Yeah.
Now
it's a military concept.
It's a military concept. And so here's the thing. So in the Canadian Army, right? You know, and I'm sure it's in the same in the Marine Corps, right? Yeah. You ate according to rank, but it's the opposite.
Yeah. Privates go first.
Right. And you know why that is? Because they're doing the most labor.
Yes.
So they need the most nutrition in order to do that. And you know what? You know, and you know, back in the day, you know, a real good colonel, he could live off of coffee and cigarettes forever.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah,
right.
Yeah.
So, you know what? So the reality is, and then the whole concept of the theory of the book is that if you're a good leader, then and supportive leader, then they'll make sure that you don't go hungry if there's no food left. Yeah. That's the whole idea behind it. Yeah. But the reality is, and then I went to the fire service, and you know what?
It's backwards.
Guess who eats first? The senior person eats first, right? And the captain sits at the table, and if you're an officer, they put something on your plate first. And I'm going, this is the exact opposite of what I've learned, and that's part of the culture. So, you know, if that's the case, are we breeding entitlement?
That's good. That's a good one.
Right? Are we breeding entitlement where when you walk into the room, you know, but depending on what it is, because in the military, and if an officer came into the room, right, you know, what do you say? Room, and everybody comes to attention in their chair, right? You know, instantly, because there's that respect. And the first thing they say is, Eddie's boys, it's okay. Right. You know, that's, they don't hold you there. Yeah. You know what I mean? It's like, you know, thank you for the acknowledgement. Okay, let's get to work. Right. But when it comes to that other stuff, and I used to see that on fire grounds or whatever, because I'd be so focused, laser focused at whatever I'm doing that I don't even want to talk to people. Right. Because I'm just focused on the fire or whatever's going on. Right. And then right out of the blue, you know, our awesome drivers would come over and they wouldn't even ask me. They take a bottle of water and they'd freaking drive it into my chest and said, hey, Superman, you got a drink too. Yeah. Right. Yeah. And you're like, fine. Yeah. Right. Fine. And they end up taking care of you. Right. Yeah. But the reality though, is that if you're at a working fire and somebody brings the coffee and the donuts on the bumper of the truck and you're the first one over there to stuff your gob, what is that saying? Yeah. You know what I mean? When all the other folks are inside working their guts out and you're over there putting the Tim Hortons coffee to you. Right? You know, on a nice ice cold night. It doesn't fly. It doesn't fly. No. But why do we do it in the firehouse? Yeah, I don't. All right? Yeah, I don't know. It's the cultural thing that we have to ask ourselves.
Like why, like even now we do it at, like, it's always the senior guys eat first, and yeah. It's a little bit backwards to me, but I mean, I get it. That's just how they do things here. But,
right. Yeah.
And if you're, definitely shouldn't be the first one to be grabbing donuts at a structure fire.
I said in the fire service, I said, it's interesting. I said, you know, because everybody, when it comes to housework, everybody has housework, including the officer. Yeah. Right. 100%. You know, and everybody has housework. And I said, in the fire service, you graduate as a senior firefighter, which means you're a qualified lieutenant. Yeah. You aspire to do toilets.
Yeah. And I honestly, with the senior man thing, I think they should be given more responsibility and mentoring.
I think so.
Yeah, I think they should be more responsible for developing the younger firefighters and the holiday guys.
And if you think about it as a senior firefighter, right? You know, you do have that, you know, training, knowledge, experience, right? So now all of a sudden is that you've been around, so you are experienced. Yeah. So yeah, but it's your third extrication course that you took. It's not your first one. And being able to sit there and go and mentor those folks. And I think giving leadership opportunities earlier in the career is what the challenge is. And we tried that program, and I don't know where it is anymore. Okay. But, you know, we tried to get that in. And one of the things that I said was pivotal in me being comfortable. So there's one thing is being a good leader, and then there's one being comfortable in a leadership position. Yes. Yeah. And one of the things of me being more comfortable in a leadership position, because you're never comfortable, right, is knowing your stuff, right? if you are confident in what you do, you have no problems addressing a crowd, speaking in front of a camera, addressing. And the best way to do that is to let people become instructors. I think instructors, you're an expert in that field. And when you're an instructor, you are teaching people at all levels, including people that are more senior to you or more qualified than you or even more experienced than you. But you have a niche, right? And I think given that opportunity by the chief at that time to be seconded to go and start our rope rescue program, I had to teach the whole department.
Yeah. You were
so for 6 months, I sat there, and you know what? And it wasn't well received by everybody, by the way, right? But for 6 months straight, I sat there and I went to Sevens and grabbed the rope truck, and we, either on the water tower or we were over the reversing falls or wherever we were doing our rope course. And we did all the different platoons, and our senior officers that were on that, I'm teaching them that it's okay to jump off a 100-foot cliff with a rope around them. Yeah. And they're only going to do that if they trust you and they feel that you're competent in your skill sets, right? Yeah. And what better way to build up confidence in the people that you might future lead than to let them know is like, oh yeah, Mike knows his stuff. Yeah. Right. That was the big thing. It's
just like getting exposure to doing that.
Right. And then all of a sudden people are going is like, yeah, I don't get it. And you're like, especially knots, right? Yeah. I don't know what it is about knots. Either people can tie them or they can't. It's like, I don't get it. Yeah. And you're like, wow. Right. You're in it like you just do. And then you learn that, okay, in order to get this individual comfortable to do this skill set, now all of a sudden you've been exposed by so many different students over the years that you convey the same information in multiple different formats, which is another leadership principle because not everybody gets it. No. So if you say that the end result is this, and then your lieutenant goes, and they do it a different way, you'd have to be open to the concept that there's 7 different ways of skinning a cat. Yeah. And that's hard too. But you learn that as an instructor because you have to do that. You have to convey that information. And at the end of the day, you leave people better than they were at the start of the course. And you've given them more skill sets and more opportunities moving forward. And I think that's leadership. So for me, you want to early in the game, you want to have leadership opportunities. Find something that you're really, really good at, or not even if you're good at it, that you have an interest in. We have guys that are really good at rope or extrication or hazmat weenies, right? Yeah. Like there's guys that just like, really good drivers. Oh my gosh, if you can find somebody that loves driving, or they can basically take that articulating boom on the Bronco and turn that into a pretzel. Like they know every angle, every distance, and they can set that up anywhere, and especially in St. John with all the crazy hills, right? And you find those guys and then you give them that opportunity. But in order to do that, though, you got to make it worth their while. And in order to make it worth their while is that you have to give them opportunities, because just because they're good here doesn't mean that they're good everywhere. Yeah. So send them to Baltimore, send them to Indianapolis for FDIC and take an advanced aerial operator super course by the best guys from New York, right?
I'd be in for that.
Right? Exactly, right? And now all of a sudden that you're rewarding them by giving them more training and more education. Now, at the end of the day, so say you do become a subject matter expert, what that definition is, it doesn't matter, right? Yeah. But when you actually are the firefighter who's really you're the go-to for the gas detectors, right? Now all of a sudden going to the factory industrial scientific and learning everything about that, some people are just like, who cares? Yeah. But if you're into it, now all of a sudden when you have that level of expertise, you're getting not only street credibility, but now all of a sudden you're putting yourself in a position where you can actually start doing leadership because you're giving that skill set back. And that whole send somebody away to be a train the trainer, then come back and train the folks gives you that opportunity as well. But I think, I would say the number one opportunity we have is like if people earlier in their career, otherwise you got to wait
forever.
If I stayed on the trucks, I would have been just based off of class of 94, right? That's right. Class of 94, my boys, right? And when we went through that, based off of the folks that stayed in the ranks, right, that were within my class, plus or minus, I would have been like 50 before I was a full-time lieutenant on the truck. Right? And I just wasn't willing to wait.
Yeah, so even with me now, I'm kind of itching to get in that leadership role, but I'm stuck. I'm stuck in the same position. I'm driving, been doing it for a while, and it's like, okay, I want to move on. I want to.
Right.
Yeah. And I guess maybe, do you think maybe we should change that a bit and maybe less about seniority and maybe a little more seniority, maybe?
Yeah, seniority's a Pandora's box, right? So the reality of the importance of seniority is making sure that the senior members contractually are getting the proper compensation and benefits, right? So your years of service matter. It matters for your pension. It matters for your compensation for your wages, your holidays, your all that stuff. And it makes a really, really big difference. But to me, there has to be a cap. And I don't know what the magic number is for that. But at some point in time, you got to open it up a little bit. But then you're opening it up to competition. Now, depending if you come from the military, everything's a competition. Right? When you become a chief officer, everything's a competition. But in those ranks, and some departments have this, say, minimum, 10 years of service, then you can write for everything. And my whole point was, if 10 years versus 15 years versus 20 years makes that much of a difference, then the 20-year firefighter should get it every time. But they don't. No. Right? And I think that at some point in time, you have to, there is a balance. Because, if you could just, every time something came out, you wrote and you went, we would have to have a really good evaluation process for promotion in order to make that happen, where those persons absolutely ran the gauntlet and was successful at the end. But just going there and giving a speech and writing a test. And so if you're really strong academically, you could probably fly through all that stuff, but you're not getting your experience. No. Right? And I think that, but setting that criteria forth gives people hope on how they move down there. Now, when you're in that spot, right, that dead zone, that 10 to 20 year dead zone of I'm not ready to write my officer papers yet. Because once you hit that, then you're on a slide. Because then as soon as you write that, then there's something else that comes up, because now you're a senior man, now you're bouncing everywhere, and now you're doing so all of a sudden you're in that hard zone where there's not a whole lot. I think if I was in your position at that time, that's when I would look to be really good at other stuff, because when you're a junior officer, you're bull's prick, you're getting shoved everywhere. Right? And when that happens, you have to be good at hazmat, and you have to be good at tech rescue, which we did, since I know you are. But you got to be good on the boat. And because now you might be in charge of that crew, right? And I remember, when they drug me off the rescue squad after 10 years of full, career service, right? I was devastated, because I was squad guy, right? With the best squad captain we ever had, Bogey, right? And I had one of the platoon chiefs, who's one of my mentors, come up to me and said, "You're a one-trick pony."
Yeah, you got to learn.
And I was like, "What do you mean?" He said, "You're going to be writing your officer papers up here. You never worked on the ladder truck. You don't even know what a tanker is, right? You only worked at 1s and 5s your whole career, right? So you don't even know where other parts of the city are." Right? You know what I mean? So you got to get, and I went, you know what? You're absolutely right. And then I went from engine one to ladder one and kind of bounced around a little bit. And then I learned that there's so much more to the fire service than that one truck that I was on at that time. So the reality, though, is that career path should be so that the reality is that you have those opportunities, because, like I said, as long as you're being challenged, you'll be happy where you're at. But we need to be challenged, right? We're all a bunch of type A's. They hired us on purpose, right? And the whole idea is that you need to be challenged in order to be successful. And it got to the point here when I was in your zone that I was taking JIBC officer courses on my own, just because I was like, I got to go. That's
where I'm at right now.
I need something more.
Yeah, I want something more. I want to, I'm even looking at taking manager courses online, use my VA to get in fire one and stuff. And I'm just like, because I'm not being challenged. I find I'm stuck on the ladder truck. I've got it down pretty well. I do help train a lot of guys on it, which is fun. But yeah, I'm kind of in that dead zone right now.
And here's another avenue too, right? You want your eyes opened up into the fire service in a larger, spectrum, right? getting involved with with the union,
Yeah.
unbelievable.
Yeah, I thought about that.
Right? Because what ends up happening is that they're giving you opportunities to look at firefighter safety, firefighter staffing, making sure wages and benefits and all that other stuff, taking care of our people is so important. And that's always been the role of the union, is to take care of the firefighter.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Yeah. And when you get involved with that, oh my gosh, the amount of committees and the amount of, stuff through the international and other stuff, that is unbelievably unlimited as well. Yeah. And if you look backwards, if you look at all the fire chiefs that we've had over since in my tenure, they were all heavily involved with the union.
Oh, okay. Yeah,
right. So it does make a big difference. Yeah. Right. And I think that they're hand in hand. Mm-hmm. And I think learning all those different, like I said, the fire service, you're never going to learn it all.
No, there's so much to
it. But what I didn't respect is that, an officer's in on a pass and just goes, yeah, I never worked on the rescue before, so you guys just do what you do.
Yeah, don't.
And I'm going, no, I need you to watch my back so that when I'm high and mighty and jump off of something, I don't die. Yeah. Right? Or swim in the water or cut a car apart or whatever. Like, I need you to top of your game. And to me, it's not an excuse to say, right? So I think there's many different avenues, but I think as long as you're being challenged, I think is important. Mm-hmm. Those committees that we were involved with and stuff like that, like the clothing committee, which I'm still getting phone calls about how they hate me about that. Right.
Is it the boots?
Yeah. There's the, the health and safety, mm-hmm. right. And all that other stuff I think is neat. The other opportunity that I had too, which is really interesting, is, in 2017, I believe I had an opportunity to go to Ottawa. Right. And as a chief officer, right. If I'm off duty, they're not hiring overtime. So they just like, hey, you want to go to this? You want to go to that? And I'm the EMO guy and it's not flood season. So life is good. Right. Yeah. So anyway, so they took this course and they picked a couple people from each province and we did the FKTP program, from knowledge to practice, with Ottawa Fire. And that was an international fire dynamics course. Okay. And that blew my mind when I had a guy from Etienne from Paris, who was an officer in Paris, right? We had Paris, we had Belgium, we had Australia, we had US, UK, like we had the gamut. Mm-hmm. And we had these instructors that they're literally writing the textbooks. Yeah. Okay. And we were sitting there, and when I had Etienne, he's like 100 pounds smaller than me. Mm-hmm. And he could work a hose line that made me look like it was my first day at recruit school. Oh, really? Like unbelievable skill sets, mm-hmm. right? You know what I mean? And we did 2 days. We did 2 burns a day for 2 weeks. Jeez. Right? And you know what I mean? And every time, and then you're going out afterwards and you're having supper together and having a beer and you're learning, and there's like, well, when we were in Korea, or when we were in here, or and you're going, oh my gosh, and then you realize very quickly with the fire service on an international basis is that there's so much more to learn. Yeah. Right? Yeah. One of my favorite podcasts is the Firefighter podcast.
I don't think I've seen that one yet.
Yeah. From the UK. Yeah. Right? Talking about the crazy, MSA helmets that we all hate over here in North America, right? Yeah. But what's funny about it though is that, he brings people from all over the world on there, and you just get this really neat perspective that we're all challenged with the same things, right? Yeah. We're all sitting there looking at major disasters, and you're looking at a firefighter with bunker gear on, and it doesn't matter if it's in the Ukraine or it's, or it's a natural disaster and mm-hmm. wherever in Asia, and you're looking at those guys going, they're us. Yeah. They're us. There's no politics there. They're just trying to do what they do, which is what we do. Yeah. And if you can get into those international kind of levels, the amount of learning is just exponential. And I think that's an opportunity too. But that all comes back to getting into instruction as well. Yeah. Right.
Yeah. Putting guys, sending them off to courses and learning from other departments.
Absolutely.
And I wish we did more than that.
Yeah, and it's hard to do too. And I used to get in trouble all the time, right? I get in trouble from my peers. I get in trouble by the union, get in trouble from management, because I'd be like, you know what I'm going to do on my vacation? I'm going to go take a dive rescue course in Connecticut. And they're like, well, that's not sanctioned. Yeah. And I was like, so it's okay for me to go skiing in Sugarloaf. but it's not okay for me to go take a dive course in Connecticut. That doesn't make any sense.
Yeah.
What I want to do on my own time is my responsibility. I'm not using firefighter kit. I'm learning a new skill. And if that's what, if that's what gets you going, that's up to you. But is it right? Well, not really, because the department should be giving me those opportunities and funding me in order to do those things for growth. But at the same time, if you look at anybody who's strive to advance the fire service, they went out on their own.
Yeah. Well, like everything you've done with within St. John, you kind of did on your own.
Oh yeah, it's just, but that's, and I think you have to do that. And you look at the private companies that are teaching, and we've had really good guys that teach extrication. We have real good guys locally that teach firefighting.
Yeah.
We have really good guys that teach, you look at them, it's this hodgepodge of firefighters on their days off, and folks, and what they do is they're delivering a product, and they're the ones that are actually advancing the strategies and the tactics of the fire service, because the rest of us are just trying to keep up with whatever NFPA told us. By the time that it's published in NFPA, it's already old news.
Yeah, somebody else has already come up with some other way to do
right?
something. Yeah.
So the reality is that those are our innovators. Those are the test tubes. Those are the people that are either they're a rep for a company and they're trying to sell you a new beaner or rope, or somebody like you want to be schooled on extrication. You're just like, I've been on the rescue squad my whole life and blah 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 blah. Get some guy who's trying to teach you Hurst or teach you Hamatro. If they're trying to sell you something, they're going to show you magic tricks you never even seen before. Yeah. But guess what? They do have a level of skill that you can only aspire to, because guess what they're doing? They're getting in their reps. Yeah. They're showing you how to cut that, that firewall, right? They're showing you how to do that, and they're doing it over and over and over again, and they actually are skilled more than you are. Yeah. Right, in this specific niche, and I think that's all part of your development.
And that same thing, like even in the military with your job, you get to the point where you're doing it so much you can do it blindfolded. And the same idea is with the Hertz guys. They're probably doing it so much they don't really think about it. They just know what to do.
Yeah. Thing about that though is that it's if you can get that. And I'm not sure what the proper term, but that automatic response to do that, for us in the military was your IA and stoppages, right? Yeah. Immediate actions and stoppages. Yeah. So when you're weapon jams, what do? If you got to think about it, you know what I mean? But if you go, cock, switch over, look into there, clear your chamber, recock, magazine back into it, and you're back in business, you're good. Yeah. Right? Yeah. But if you got to think about those steps, it's too late. Yeah. Right. Yeah, but if you can do that automatically, right? And I think what we're doing by getting your reps in like that, by doing that stuff automatically, like in the military, and we should be like that in the fire service. And for the most part, we are for a lot of our stuff, right? Yeah. Guys probably don't think about what happens is that when their regulator isn't on properly, they just fix it and they just keep going in the middle of a fire. And afterwards you're like, wouldn't be the first time I went into a building and didn't turn my air on and I was plugged in, right? Do you panic? No, you just turn your air on and move out. So, but I guess the thing is that in order to get that, you're eliminating the variables. And I think that's what's so important about the training and so important about practicing our skill sets is that you're eliminating the variables, because there's so many variables at a fire. No fire is the same. No. Right? So if and John McDonough said this, and I'm going to give a shout out, and I try not to use too many names during this podcast, but like I said, no names, no pack drill, right? Yeah. But one of the things that John said is that he has non-negotiables. And I think that was really important. That resonated with me. And basically he said, I don't know what you're doing inside when you go into that building, but he said, you know what, here's the things that I need to guarantee that you are doing for me when you go inside so that I know, are you staying low? Are you cooling your gases? Are you advancing with the fire? Like, are you doing all the stuff that I need? And if I know that you're doing all those things consistently on a regular basis, you just eliminated all these variables for me. So now I can think more strategically and not into the details. Yeah. And I think that's really important, right?
It is important.
And so when you go and and that's the same, like the 4-man truck, love to have a 5-man truck, but a 4-man truck, we're so comfortable that the officer does this and the driver does that and the junior does this and the senior man does that. When you go out there, you don't have to think about whether or not junior's hooking up the hydrant or grabbing the tools, because he knows that's what he does. Yeah. And now you're eliminating all those variables. So when you do show up at the front of the door and the senior man has this and the junior man doesn't want to miss out on the initial attack, so they're sprinting down from the hydrant, right? Yeah. And they would, and when you walk in the door, all that stuff is already done because you practice it over and over and over again. And I think that as a commander, what ends up happening is that as a leader is that you're always trying to eliminate the variables, because there's always stuff that you're never going to see, right? Yeah. Fighting a fire in -30 and fighting a fire in +30 Celsius is a whole other different ballgame, right? One, you need triage units because guys are losing fluid like crazy, and one, your trucks are freezing up and the men are freezing up as well. So somewhere in between is, you're trying to eliminate the variables, because there's always going to be a ton of variables that you don't know.
Yeah. That is so true. That is so true. There's so many ways things go bad on a fire. That's for sure.
Yeah. And I think as a leader, you're always thinking about the next step. Yeah. You're always thinking about the what ifs, right? Probabilities and possibilities. What do I know really could happen immediately right now? And what are some of the things that I kind of have to think about, kind of down the road? And I think that's the whole idea behind leadership, is kind of doing that forecasting. But, another principle, that I think that John's fresh in my mind because I just listened to one of his podcasts. But one of the things that he said is knowing the spread. Right? Which again comes back to eliminating variables, and knowing the spread, right? The betting spread is that, here's the thing. If you have a crew, and I walked up to a crew and said, I need you to vent that house. Now, of course, somebody's going to get on the debate here on your podcast and put in a thing that's like, who does vertical vent anymore? Like, grow up, right? You know what I mean? Yeah. But we do it in St. John. Yeah. So I said, okay, right? Let's do this old school, not using an aerial. Throw up a 35-foot extension ladder, go up to the roof, throw a roof ladder up, and cut me a nice 4x4 or 4x8 hole, right? How long do you think the average crew would take to do that?
Oh, I guess it depends. The average crew? Oh, geez.
Right?
Yeah, that'd be...
Would it be, so not without calling anybody out, would it be timely enough to make an effect on the inside? Because one of the big things I learned back in the day, right or wrong, because we can talk about tactics all day long, is coordinated ventilation. And the whole idea behind coordinated ventilation, because, they were talking about flow path and fire dynamics and all this other stuff, is that you punch the roof when the boys are hitting the fire, and you are creating the flow path so that your heated gases and the contaminants and smoke are all going where you want it to go instead of where it goes, right? Okay? And it localizes the fire. And it does work. Yeah. But that's why they have truck companies and engine companies, right? Because if they're doing what they're doing really, really good, it happens at the same time. But if you throw one of these zingers at a fire and, hey, guys, I need you to do this, and it takes them 15 minutes to do it, your crews are already inside hammering the fire, putting water back, and it's not helping anyway, right? You know what I mean? Yeah. So I think knowing the spread, I think, is important. And as a leader, you have to know what the capabilities are of whatever you're in charge of, either your crews or your men, because we're all leaders at different levels. Yeah. And I think that, understanding the capabilities of your folks, that these people might be better suited for this situation and these people might be better suited for this situation. And, when you're looking at the firefighters now, like, you do have quite a spread. Yeah. You have young guns that can do stuff that I can't even do. My son's showing me stuff and it's like, I haven't even heard of that before, dude. Yeah. Like, and I study firefighting still. Like, I'm like, I haven't even heard of that. Right. And he's like, oh yeah, because they have a very proactive training department, and they're always challenging, and they always challenging the recruits to say, prove me wrong, show me something new. We want to learn too. And when you have that culture of learning and learning from your mistakes, that's unbelievable. Yeah. So what happens is that you don't know this stuff, right? But what has to happen though, whatever you're in charge of as a leader, you have to know what the capabilities are of those that you're in charge of, and you have to set them up for success, right? So putting people towards a losing battle because you didn't use the right tool for the job, that's your responsibility as a leader, right?
And that comes back to the whole, getting in and doing those reps and training with your men and learning their they're spread, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, and I've seen it in different ways, and I don't know which one's the right one. Okay. I've had platoon chiefs that I've seen in the past because when I was the deputy, right, and there's a story there too, but when I was the deputy and you're doing the master shift, you know what I did, right? And people hated it. I put it back on the platoon chiefs.
Yeah.
I said, let's do it. Let's have a draft.
Yeah.
Let's have a draft. And they're like, what? I was like, yeah, it's your platoon. You put your crews together. I don't know how firefighter Bloggins is going to do. Like, that's not, the easiest thing is keep status quo. So what I focused on is like, this guy's getting promoted. So this guy's going to have to move to this house because he's going to be the house captain. So I was all very analytical when I did it, right? This guy's more senior than this guy. So this guy should move. Like I was very, like it was a formula for me, but I don't know the personalities as well as I should on the fire, right? In the fire stations. So what we do with the platoon chief is that I said, all right, you put your crews together.
Yeah. Yeah.
They loved it. Firefighters didn't like it too much. No. Now all of a sudden, this platoon chief, that might be a little, whatever, I'll just keep status quo. And you're like, oh, I wanted a shift. Yeah. And then you go to this guy who just likes to mix it up all the time. And then there's two theories too when you're building your crews, right? Yeah. So what some guys do is like, oh, we're going to put whatever this is too. And this is an oversimplification. I'm going to put a good firefighter with a bad firefighter. Yeah. Right. So what they try to do is make a whole bunch of mediocre crews. Is that right? Maybe. Or what do is you stack the deck. You have a couple banger trucks. And this is what my platoon chief used to do, right? They put trucks with all their, with what would be perceived as good firefighters, right? Yeah. Bangers, right? They put these firefighters all on certain trucks. And then they'd have the trucks that were the haves and the have-nots. Right? Now, if you were lucky enough to be on one of the good trucks, you went to everything. It was awesome, right? It wasn't even your fire. You're just like, second alarm, you're going in. This is great. But so what does that mean? And the only way to do that is to test it. Yeah. And how are we testing? We need the data. And we do the data means we have to start measuring what our performance is. How do you know if a crew is good or not? Unless you're measuring their performance. Yeah. And how do you do that? Right? Is that stopwatches? Is that, skill sets?
And running through paces and seeing how they're doing together.
And what is that? And so how do you know you're making the right decision if you don't even know? Because here's the thing. All fires go out, right? So you can go into a fire and you can have relatively junior guys that are doing it all by the numbers, right? And they go down and they pound a fire. And so what your assumption is that it was a squib. It was no big deal. Same senior firefighters, and this is another example that John uses, right? Goes down. They're not crawling on the floor because their knees hurt too much. They're not cooling the gases as they move down the hall because they were always taught to fight the fire from the unburnt side, right? Never shoot water from the outside. Fight your way down the hall till you get to the bedroom and then hammer it. By the time they get there, they've absorbed so much heat that they get cooked. Yeah. And when they hammer it, they, you know what I mean? They scald themselves and the whole 9 yards and they come out. But because they're senior firefighters, you're going, ooh, that must have been a hot one. Same fire. Yeah. Right? So the junior guys, they're crawling, they're shooting water, they're doing this, they're doing that, they're doing it all by the numbers. And at the end of the day, the perception is that same fire, the more experienced guys, if they get knocked back, that it's a bad fire. Yeah. The junior guys get knocked back, or if the junior guys are successful, the junior firefighters are successful, what ends up happening is that, oh, it was just a squib. Oh, it's just a pot on the stove. Oh, it's just a couch, right? And so, and you're going, no, actually, they hammered it. They did exactly what we taught them to do. And so measuring the effectiveness of a fire crew, and it just can't be a metric like, you went to so many different medical calls. It can't be how many people you save because there's too many variables. No. But I think that comes back to the training ground. And I think that there should be a level of competency and a benchmark that we all aspire to as command officers, as well as lieutenants, as well as like how quick can we do that, that initial size up in 360 with the tick, guess what? That's the LT's job. Yeah. And you know what? Let's measure how fast they do it and how accurate they are when they're doing it. And I think if you do that, now all of a sudden when you're making these decisions, otherwise it's everything's just an assumption. Yeah. You know what I mean? Yeah. So, and I think that that's a big part of the decision-making process when the fire service is that I don't think we're measuring ourselves. No. The UL studies that came out for fire dynamics, and I'm going right down a rabbit hole here.
So, I'm in.
Yeah. when you look at those studies, what they did is that they basically lit a fire and they put a million sensors in there and measured everything 7 ways in Sunday, which is great, right? Now all of a sudden it's like, oh, you can't shoot from the outside because you're going to push fire. They disbanded that. And then they read it and say, well, actually, if you fog in the window, you're really going to screw things up because you're in training air. So, but what they did though is they actually measured it and did it over and over and over and over again to say that, you know what, here's some pretty solid tactics that you can apply on the fire ground, that we've actually set fires with real furniture in real buildings, and we measured the outcomes, and it really hit the fire service hard, because now our forefathers in the fire service were actually wrong.
Yeah. And I think that's another issue we have, is we're so set in our ways and traditions that, you know, with these new studies come out, we don't implement them, and we stay stuck in the past.
Yeah, and I think that's a big challenge. And as a leader, you have to be very open-minded. You know, it's called the inversion of expertise.
Okay.
Right. And, you know, and that's a, you know, General McChrystal, you know, because here's a guy that I learned from, right? Because what he showed me, you know, with his experiences was that you're in charge of people that are better than you. And so you're not the expert anymore.
No.
Right. So it forces you to stay out of the tactics, and now you have to support them in an environment that you're no longer successful at anymore. So you have to let go of what made you successful in the past to support those that are actually better than you are, and hopefully they're more successful than you are.
Yeah.
You know, and that's hard to do. You got to put your ego in check for that stuff, because the best thing that can happen as a leader is that you empower people enough that they surpass you.
And they take your role, and like one of the best leaders I guess aspired to or looked up to was this my old first sergeant in Iraq. He was slated to go Delta Force. He was special forces guy. Did a couple tours in Fallujah. Yep. And I remember him. He was on my truck, and I was the vehicle commander of the truck. And he's like, "Oh, I'm gonna sit with you." I'm just like, "Well, you can be the VC. You're the senior guy." He's like, "No, you still take it." He just sat back and he didn't. You know what I mean? He just let me do my thing. Yeah. And he let me he took his own pride back and just kind of let me do my. I was like, oh, okay. Yeah. And I think it's really hard, you know, and the number one thing about ego, you know, you want to look back, you know, if we're trying to say, you know, where I've screwed up in the past, right, is that if you're always chasing the brass ring, right, what ends up happening is that you're not really in the moment, and you're focusing on, now it's good to have a plan, and it's always good to grow and move forward, and I get that. You need to always grow. It's really, really important. But not at the expense of others. No. So when you can be humble enough to check your ego and let somebody pile the wood the way that they're going to pile it. Because guess what? It's going to be dry wood at the end of the year, regardless if the bark is up or the bark is down, it doesn't matter. Right? And if you can do that, empower them, they're going to learn from those experiences, and they're going to figure it out. And hopefully they figure it out in a way that's actually better than you used to do it. But you got to let them do it. But you can't do that if you're always feeling challenged by your subordinates, right? And having that, you know, I'm not a big fan of this open door policy. I think you should have an open door policy if you're the responsible person for them. So lieutenants should have an open door policy for the firefighters. But I don't think you should, you know, like, because, you know, all the chiefs that I've had is like, oh, I have an open door policy, right? Or the city manager, you have any problems, you have an open door policy. Next thing you know, firefighter Bloggins, right, is talking to the city manager because he's not happy to weigh on his vacation selection and circumvented like 7 layers of rank, right? That probably could have, you know, solve that problem just by calling their union rep the first time. Right. Now, all of a sudden you've highlighted this perceived problem, right? You know, so there is checks and balances there, but you know, the latest trend right now is like, I wasn't around on the trucks. We had phones a little bit, but that stuff was not there. That distraction wasn't there. That was not available, and that wasn't part of it. And I think that right now what happens is that we're creating this environment of instantaneous, you know,
feedback. You know, it's like, you know, I want to know this. You just Google it and you got it, right? Or ask AI, they'll figure it out.
We got iPads in our trucks now, so
right, yeah. Now there's iPads in the trucks.
Yeah.
And the reason why I say that is I think, you know, if I wanted to look back at one of the things that I really wasn't good at, you know, and I mentioned it before, is that, you know, it's that patience that you have to learn. Yeah. It takes time to develop things, projects, people, skill sets. It just takes time. Mm-hmm. And if you're an impatient person, it takes a long, that's a hard pill to swallow. Yeah. Right. Yeah,
just being able to step back a bit and let somebody
you just got to let it,
take the reins a little bit.
You just got to let it happen. Right. You just got to let it happen. So,
hoping to develop, you know, future leaders kind of thing.
Yeah. And that should always be your goal, is succession planning, right?
Yeah.
You know, so when you move on to the next role, you know, so when I left the fire service and went into the private sector, mm-hmm. they didn't replace my job.
No.
And that bothered me. Not because, like, you know, first of all, I was taught by my more experienced platoon chiefs, is like, you know, it's like, hey, Bubba, you know what? It's like pulling your hand out of a bucket of water.
Yeah.
Give it a minute. Nobody knows your hand was in it. And I was like, ah. So that's an ego thing. That's your ego. But that wasn't it. It's like, I thought there was some really good development, especially in the emergency management space. Mm-hmm. And now they're hiring a deputy for emergency management. So that's awesome, right? You know, they're going to fill that role and they're going to go back. But I was like, wow, like we had good momentum because we had a lot of major events in St. John that EMO was part of, you know, and a larger thing. And I think we had some good buy-in because we had those focusing events and we're putting programs together.
Yeah, I went through one of the programs.
And we had some good momentum there. Yeah. And then when I left and they didn't fill it, I was like, well, obviously it wasn't that big of a deal.
Yeah, it kind of just died off. I was like, oh, okay.
Yeah, it wasn't that big of a deal. I thought it was a pretty big deal, but apparently it wasn't that big of a deal. And I think that's really hard. And like, you know, so I think, you know, like from a leadership perspective is that all you can do, hopefully, is make things better than it was when you got there. Yeah. But don't stay long enough that you start to regress.
Yeah, that's big.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, it is. And then also believe that, you know, anybody minus rank can lead. You can lead up and you can lead down. You know what I'm saying?
Yep.
Yeah.
And leading up's important too. Yeah. And understanding, like, you know, where I'm at now, like I said, they're all better than I am where I'm at now. Yeah. And they lead up all the time. Mm-hmm. Right? Mm-hmm. And they're always going, so you might want to give this person a call over here. And you're like, that's why I hired you, because you're better at it than I am. But it takes you, like, you got to really put your ego in check to do that. Because if you're like, I'm the boss, I'm making decisions, thank you very much for your suggestion, but you can leave now. That's you're not going to have success in that anyway. Because, you know, it comes back to, you know, one of the questions that you submitted just for conversation was like, you know, it's always about the mission and how you get there is really insignificant. At the end goal, if you're successful at the end of it, then that's important. Yeah. And when we look at that, I mean, what does that mean, right? You know, what does that mean? You know, as a leader, as a fire chief, right? It means that you got to set the direction, but everybody has to buy into it. Mm-hmm. But you got to set that direction so that everything you say and everything you do comes back to these 4 principles or these character, you know, or your mission statement or whatever. And I think one of the biggest problems, and I'm skipping all through your questions, pal.
This is perfect.
I apologize.
I'm throwing these right down. I don't need them. We're good.
Yeah. And I think, you know, you asked a real tough question for me before, like, you know, just to kind of get my brain turning here is like, you know, why are we having the challenges we have right now in the fire service? It's not just St. John.
No.
Charlottetown Fire Department posted from the local for a fire chief. They're not even the hiring party, by the way.
Yes.
But what they did is they highlighted character traits that they think is important for a fire chief
to have.
And they actually posted that to kind of bring this all back in. Everybody understand is that you need integrity, you need accountability, you need to be, you know, and I was like, you know what, that's actually pretty brilliant. And I'm going, you know, they're not, you know, they're just kind of resetting, like, folks, let's go back to what the actual role of the fire chief is. Yes. And I think the challenge of the fire chief today is that I'd like to say that they're the leader. They're the middleman.
Yeah. Well, they're the middle between the city. They're the middle between, you know, the union.
Yep.
And yeah, it's a hard position. And it should get back to more of them actually leading the department.
Right. So I had I had traditional fire chiefs when I first got there that just would say, no, we're not doing that. This is how it is.
Yeah.
And then now what happens is that the fire chief was a community figurehead that actually had a little bit more clout because the fire service was untouchable. Mm-hmm. Well, we got touched.
Yeah.
And now all of a sudden, the fire chief's position is just another director. It's just another department head, just like anything else. And not saying that the works department is any less important than the fire service. It's just that it is to us because, like I said, our consequences are life.
Yeah.
So we have extreme. If there's potholes in the road, they're going to get a million more phone calls about potholes in the road than whether or not the firefighters were nice to the patient or not.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. But we hold ourselves to a higher standard because the consequences are so extreme, which is life and death.
Yeah.
So we take it very seriously, right? But I think the challenge, you know, and I thought about this a lot, is that why is there such a disconnect? Why are we having such a challenge with not just locally, like across the fire service? And I think it's just because we're not aligned when it comes to public safety.
Yeah.
Right. So the union, like I said, everybody's perspective is their priority.
Yeah.
Right. Their context is the priority. Yeah. So, you know, what is the union for? Just look on the IFF website and they're about the firefighter making sure that they have fair and equitable workplace that's safe so they can go home to their families and not die from cancer 10 years after they retire. Beautiful. Yeah. Fire chief is actually their responsibility is to make sure that we are serving the community for community safety and public safety reasons. In the city, yes, safety is a deal, but they're also trying to keep the coffers working and they're trying to make sure that their city is effective because it's easy to say that we're going to give the fire service everything they want, but everything is a balancing act between, you know, between resources. Yeah. But what we don't, and then nobody wants to talk about this, right? Now we have regional service commissions and now we have the office of the fire marshal, right? Yeah. And the provincial government that is responsible, right? And where they are in these conversations. Yeah. So if we're an absolute gong show at municipality X in the province of New Brunswick, right? Shouldn't the fire marshal have the opportunity to step in and say, hey, you're mismanaging your stuff? But it's not that easy because it is the responsibility of the municipality to manage their own fire resources. Yeah. Right. Yeah. So it's not that easy. No. However, when we're talking about alignment at the end of the day, that all the parties involved that we just mentioned within the public safety services, right, should all be aligned on what we're trying to do for the community, for community safety. That's why it's called public safety. And at any point in time, we're arguing about T-shirts, right, or staffing, or fire trucks, or, you know, and that's what I've learned with being a volunteer firefighter. It's different because there is better alignment, and I don't know why there is, but it seems to be, and there's more availability of those, say, core themes of what the fire service is delivering in the community. And it's not that there's any less expectations there, but you know what? Those firefighters that I work with now, they are 100% for the community, right?
I think maybe it's a lot less political in a way. Maybe
there is politics, but I think like it's not as rigid as it would be, say, in a municipality, right? Yeah. But I'm just saying, it's like I just can't keep up with them. Yeah, they're always volunteering in the community. It's always about the community events, and it's not like they're any less of a fire service. They're not. What they are is that they're very engaged. They're going calls all the time. Yeah, you know what I mean. But the difference is it's like one station. Right. Okay. Yeah. And all four crews are working together at the same time. Yeah. That's what it's like when you have a smaller department. Just like in St. John, we would be like one battalion in New York City. Yeah. Like, right. You know, because a battalion chief would have 7-8 stations or whatever in a larger, Toronto, New York, whatever. And so everything is just scalable. So they're still going to the same amount of calls and they're still doing the stuff. But that the same thing is that they have that other layer, which is that they're there for the community and they have that community, and not that we're not within the municipality, but when you start getting paid for stuff, that changes your perspective.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Because some people, let's call it out, right? Yeah. Some people are firefighters because it's a good career.
Yeah,
right?
It's good pay. It's a good career. I get
it's a good career, right? Good benefits, good work schedule, right?
Yeah.
You know, and some people, and it's okay to be a firefighter because it's a good job. But that's not most of us.
No.
Most of us live it and breathe it. I mean, I went back to volunteering because I couldn't get it out of my head.
Yeah.
I couldn't get it out of my head, right?
Yeah.
And I think, you know, and you want to know why, like, guys that serve in the military, why they become part of reserve units, you know, why do they do that? Is just because they just can't let it go. Yeah. And that's not a bad thing. Oh. You know, and that's not a bad thing.
It's that passion.
But I'm saying, like, if we're really going to have alignment, if we're really going to talk about what is the fire service to the community, and if you could define that and get council and mayor to sign off on that, and the union to sign off on that, because the fire chief doesn't really have a whole lot of say on it, by the way, okay. Right? They're directing, they're more like the facilitator. They're the ones that have to execute it. Yeah. And then that actually align with the provincial direction on what the fire service looks like in the province of New Brunswick. How do you do that? That's the challenge. Yeah. That's the challenge. And like I said, when we have mission statements or we have mottos or mantras or whatever it is, it's just because at any point in time, you say, why are we doing this right now? We're doing this because of, you know, community safety, or we're doing this because of this. So when guys are going, we got to do vacant building surveys again, right? I really don't want to do this because this is really not fighting fires. Yeah. Right. What ends up happening is that, you know, why are we doing this? We're doing this because, you know what, if we have a call on this, it's going to be safer for our firefighters and safer for our neighbors and safer for the community. And that's why we got to do it. But we got to keep coming back to that. We got to keep coming back to what are our priorities, and then keep, and the mish of the leader is they keep bringing people back to what the mission statement is and what the core values are that you're trying to uphold. That's what's hard, because it's really easy to go down rabbit holes. Yeah, it's really easy, and especially if it's not super busy, it's really easy to get clouded about this or that or whatever. You know what? We used to have brush fires all the time when I was a younger firefighter. They'd take a holiday guy and they'd take a driver and they'd throw you on a pickup truck with a bunch of pumpkins, and you just go for the day and you put out fire. Yeah. So we had brush fires all the time. Now we're doing forest fires. Yeah. I never did forest fires before.
We started training that here recently.
Yeah. And you're going, okay. And why is that? Because now our risk landscape has changed. Right? And we have different. So if we can identify from a firefighting perspective that the challenges that we have changed, then we constantly have to be doing that reassessment and making sure that our MISH is being communicated from the top down, all the way from the firefighter, all the way up to the leaders of the fire service, even nationally. So
how does a chief go about actually doing that? Like making sure his mission statement is clearly stated so everyone understands it?
You know, I'd be the fire chief if I could have figured that out, Lucas. Well,
to be honest, I thought I was kind of shooting for you to be the next one. I thought you were going that way.
No, I think you need somebody who first of all, I think the decision has to be evidence-based. Yeah. I think you have to do it on the data, right? And a really good friend of mine who does consulting right now is really pushing for doing proper risk assessments in the community, right? Yeah. And what happens is that's such a hard pill to swallow, because we used to have strategic reviews happen while I was there. We used to have these consultants come in and everybody knows who they were. And they would say stuff that as a firefighter, you're like, they don't understand. Yeah. Right? Yeah. But don't they? They're professionals. Right. Yeah. And I use this as an example, right? We used to do, which was awesome. You want to learn how to drive? Go back in the heyday, we were doing a couple thousand fire alarm activated, and it was a full response every time. Platoon chief was getting good experience. Drivers were getting lots of experience. Like, it was great. And then we realized, what is the risk of taking like 5 giant trucks and zooming them through the city at full speed multiple times a day on a regular basis? And you're going, is it really worth the risk? Yeah. So what did we do? So we did a study, and 99.7, now it's probably wrong, right? Yeah. But it was but I remember it being a stupidly high percentage. Like, I've never seen that on a test before in my life. So if I got that, I'd be pretty happy. Yeah. But 99.7% of fire alarms activated at the time were false.
Yeah.
So why are we doing this? Now it's like a fire alarm activated, but now it's a pot on the stove that you show up with one truck, right? And one truck can't do something in an apartment on the 7th floor by themselves. So now they have to wait for the rest of the crews to come. And we did have, one of our senior captains that I high respect for did have his ass out in the breeze one day where he showed up at a fire, and here he is all by himself waiting for 5 minutes before the next truck even arrives.
That's dangerous.
That's a bad spot. So what do? We course corrected, and now it's a 2-truck response. So at least we know that we're going to have at least a crew there in backup if it is a bad day to get things going. And usually it's the first 2 or 3 crews that are doing all the heavy lifting at the beginning of a fire, right?
Yeah,
so I think that data is really, really important. So going back to your original question, is that how does the fire chief do that? I think the fire chief has to do that with good data. And I think the fire chief has to do that by having those conversations. Now, bringing all the parties together is really, really hard to do because there has to be a willingness of all parties to decide that this is the direction. Yeah. The problem is, like anything else, and I'm learning this in private sector as well as in the public sector, if it's not mandated, it's probably not going to happen. If it's not regulated, if there's not a higher authority that say, all you folks need to get in a room right now and have this conversation, then what's going to happen is that it's probably not going to materialize. Okay. It'll be great. You'll get in there at the beginning and everybody high five, and it's great that we build these relationships and move forward. But if nothing actually comes to fruition from it, then you're wasting your time. Yeah. So, but what it is that if you go back to core values and that crazy stuff, because we can sit here all day long and write a mission statement for the fire service that sounds really badass, but you're probably not going to be able to execute it. No. But what we want to make sure is that, let's go back to it. When I became a firefighter, the last thing I ever wanted to do is emergency management.
No. Yeah. No.
Right?
No.
You know what? I want to jump off shit with rope.
I want to go. I want
to drive boats and fight fires and do left-handed searches in buildings and, and I mean, carry a bunch of wedges in my helmet to leave all the doors open to make a really, really good flow path. Like all the stuff that we learned back in the day is wrong now. Yeah. But, I didn't want to do this stuff when you're going, okay, why did I gravitate towards emergency management is because nobody knows what the solution is. You have to bring a whole bunch of stakeholders together and somehow build consensus on this is the path forward. And that's what emergency managers teach. What is that? You only have limited resources with a whole bunch of people that all have their own priorities, and how do you build consensus? And that means somebody has to be in charge, and that's what the incident commander's role is. Yes. And that's what's so important about it. And we're never going to figure that out because, and like I said, is like, it takes 3 days during a major incident just to get your feet under you, that you have the right people in the room, you are making the right decisions, and it takes 3 days before you start a rinse and repeat cycle, right? Yeah. It doesn't matter if it's a wildfire or a big flood or a Hurricane Zelda or whatever it is, right? Or even a big commercial fire. By the time that you get, I find it really, really interesting because everybody else uses like a mutual aid plan where they have, and they can move forward and share resources and stuff like that. And we've done it. We've gone, right? We do it for hazmat now. Yeah. But the challenge I find is like, why are we not doing that for major fires? Fredericton's an hour away. Moncton is an hour and a half away.
Pride, maybe a little bit.
Well, I don't, when we look at mutual aid, we work at sharing resources and stuff like that. We always look at our immediate neighbors on our adjacent borders. And that totally makes sense. Right. Yeah. But, really, like if you were in Toronto, right? Yeah. One side of the city to the other side of the city is an hour away, and it's the same fire service. Here, we're just smaller and we're chopped up a little bit more, right? So I think, this is where those opportunities come, and I think we're making a good direction in that. So when you have fire chief conferences, when you have stuff like that, where you have the ability for leaders to get together, Maritime Fire Chief is happening right now. Yeah. When you give leaders an opportunity to learn from each other, share resources, and then actually come up with some mandates moving forward, I think that's where you get your change. Because the union does it.
Yeah.
100%.
Yeah,
Right?
we go through, go to conventions and they
Go to conventions and they have the international that's given them overarching guidance on moving forward. The CAFC, the Maritime, Association of Fire Chiefs, like all those folks, they're all getting together and they're sharing and they're moving forward. And what we'd like to see is that those mandates and the union does a very good job of political action, is that you need your political leaders to be part of those discussions.
Yeah.
But you look at the Canadian Association of Fire Chiefs, they're coming up with accreditation, credentialing and what that actually looks like to be an accredited fire service. They're changing standards. They're bringing things forward that is actually making communities safer. We got to be in those bigger rooms.
Yeah.
We got to be in those bigger rooms and participate in that. And I think that we've had some fire chiefs in the past that have done that very, very well, right? Recently and in the past.
Yeah.
Right. And I think that, getting out there and learning, because if you're just in here trying to do it by yourself, what ends up happening is that you're just going to be recycling ideas from the old days, right?
The old days, yeah.
And I think there's one innovation. And if you look at now, like some of the fire chiefs that are true guns, guess what? They're not. They're not a 250-pound linebacker that used to work the squad.
No.
They're people that are smart. There are people that are experienced. There are people that can really see the fire service holistically. And I think that know all the different aspects, because all they want to do is shoot water and search for people and jump off shit with rope. And I keep saying that because that's really all they wanted to do.
That's what I wanted to do.
Right? But the reality is that, let's talk about proper budgeting processes, community safety, fire prevention, right? Everybody wants to be an arson investigator, but nobody wants to go and hold people accountable for proper things within the fire service when it comes to fire prevention. Yeah. And the reality is you probably save more lives in fire prevention than we ever did doing rescue. Yep. So the reality is that, and they're probably the smallest departments within any fire service, right? Yeah. And the reality is, so I'm going to throw this out here, and I'm going to be getting all kinds of phone calls about this, right? But you know what? If we know that that's going to make a major impact based off of good data, right? And that's going to save lives, then why aren't all firefighters participating in fire prevention activities? And I don't mean barbecues, and I don't mean the smokehouse. It's all important. But how come we're not doing those inspections as well, right? Yeah. Because there's no time, right? And that's the thing, is like we're trying to balance this time, and that's what's so challenging about leadership in the fire service today, because now you got to be hazmat tech, you got to be medical first responder, and you got to be a tech weenie like me, and you got to be able to drive, and you're writing your promotional papers, and you're taking Dalhousie Henson College courses for leadership and fire service administration, and you're doing all this stuff, and then now some deputy like me is going, I want you guys to go out and check this building for smoke alarms, right? And you're like, when is the time? Like, there's no time, right? Yeah. And I think that that's the biggest challenge is managing all of these constraints and problems. And one of our platoon chiefs said it really, really good. He said, when you look at cities the size of St. John, they have all the big city problems with little city resources. Yeah. And that's what the challenge is. Because you think about it, we do everything. Oh, yeah. We do everything, right? And I mean, we've had some of the best instructors that teach internationally for CB&R and E. So like we have the guys, right? We've had the folks that are going, we do high-rise training. Like we've had the very, very best, but bringing that all in together is just so hard, because how do you manage all those programs? Because every programs take money, resources, training time, competencies. And if you can figure that out, that's what fire chiefs do. And that's when you have really good fire chiefs. I think they've figured out that balance of having the trust and the respect of their leadership, and they're able to take whatever available resources they can, beg, borrow, steal, mandate, and then take those, and they're the ones that can best deploy those at the operational level. Yeah. It's hard to do.
That would be hard to do. Very hard to do.
And
juggling all that.
And I think that's where the burden of leadership comes from a chief officer perspective, is because they all have bosses, right? Everybody forgets that. The firefighter, the ultimate of the ultimate, the pinnacle, is the fire chief. Yeah. The fire chief is just a department head amongst many other department heads within the municipality. Yeah. Right?
You think maybe that's kind of where we went wrong with things, that we kind of took that power away from them? Or?
I think that maybe not having the fire... It's not that the fire chief should have any more authority, but the thing is that the difference with the fire chief is that they live, breathe it, and grew up in the service, and they're fully, and they're just not another manager.
Yeah.
Right? They're just another superintendent. They actually live and breathe it.
Yeah.
And I think that the difference with the fire chief is that the fire chief because they believe in it, what ends up happening is that they have the trust of the community, where maybe the director of public works may not, because that's just their job for this year. Next year, they might be in charge of the water department, and they're not, living and breathing it. They're managing it very, very well because of their expertise. But I think the difference is that when you have public safety leaders, fire, police, EMS, right, emergency management, they believe in what they're doing. And because they believe in it and they're actually sacrificing for the community, they get that community respect. Yeah. And I think that's one of the core values that we can't lose. Yeah. So as a leader, you have to keep fostering that relationship with the community, and you have to keep doing, and if you notice that, like you say in the police department, right? If all you had is a whole bunch of TAC teams, you're not going to make any friends, because they're kicking doors and, right? You know what I mean? Like, that's not that.
Turn the public against you.
But if you look at, some of the best police officers that I knew, that I grew up and went to school with, they were community police officers. They were not interested in being SWAT team guys. No. You know what they were interested in? They were the ones that actually walked the beat or patrolled their area in the neighborhoods, and they knew every kid and they knew all that other stuff. And what do you think? What community is safer, right? And I think the fire service could learn a lot from that, especially from a leadership, is that we have to be community. And when you look at the stuff that the local is doing as far as being involved with the community, that's not just the local. It should be the fire service itself, right? I agree. And we used to go through days, we used to laugh about the doors up, doors down, right? Yeah. So what ended up happening is, like, depending on the flavor of who got in trouble that day, right? So it should be, no, keep the doors up in the fire station, let the community come in, mingle with the community or whatever. Yeah. And then all of a sudden somebody would say something smart ass to somebody on the street, some firefighter would beak back at them, then it's doors closed, right? And then don't engage. When you go in and close the door, don't talk to the public, right? And then all of a sudden it's like, no, you get to get more in the public, and then all of a sudden the doors are back up again, right? And then somebody would have the perception is that sitting there swinging your legs, sitting on the bumper of the truck, is not a good perception of what firefighters doing, because somebody say, well, we're paying these guys, all this money, they should be doing something. I was like, what do you want them to do? Push-ups like 24/7? Like you know what I mean? And I think that comes to education, and it comes to, and any time that we've ever had really strong campaigns where we engaged in the public, right? I think that we've had better as a fire chief. I think the fire chief has had more success with embedding themselves more with community level, I would say, not incidents, but projects or initiatives. I think that was really, really important. And the more that you're involved with the community, the more that you're going to have community. Because every time we do one of these episode read things or whatever, fire service is like knocking it out of the park as far as public opinion is concerned. But I think the community, right, also has a responsibility because, I was on the command team, right? Yeah. That the only command team that I know that closed a fire station. Yeah. Right? Now, you want to talk about taking it on the chin. Yeah. Right? But guess what we didn't have? We didn't have mass protests on the corner of Millage Avenue stopping that station from getting closed. And
that's the problem, I think, sometimes.
Right? So you have all kinds of people that'll, they're very brave on social media.
But they don't come out.
But so if the community, so if we're all here for public safety and community safety, and we're all not engaged in it, then where was the community if this was so impactful? Yeah. Right? So we all have a stake in it. And I guess, and that's what's really hard from a leadership perspective, is that you have all these different layers, and it doesn't matter if you're, in a junior leadership position within the fire service or at a senior leadership in the fire. There's so many different layers and different people with different priorities and responsibilities. Somehow you have to engage all of them and come up. You're not going to make everybody happy, but it's going to help do the right decision. Yeah. And I think that's what's really, really hard about these leadership positions, is that there is so many different layers that you have to do. Yeah,
there's tons of layers.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then, juggling, the community, juggling, you're leading and mentoring your guys, and and trying to do best for the fire service. Then you have the management, and then you have the union you got to deal with. Yeah, it'd be a lot.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
And they can all learn from each other.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
They can all learn from each other, and they can all share those experiences. But I think at the end of the day, like the fire service is a pretty special place.
Yeah, it is pretty special.
Right?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And it's one of those things where you can go anywhere in the world, right? And have that, that instant respect and understanding by just looking at what other firefighters are doing in other parts of the country. Like, the reality is, I mean, we get, pretty heavy duty cruise ship industry in St. John, and you working up down, that door's not, somebody's knocking on that door nonstop because they're from all over the world in the cruise ship. They want to buy a t-shirt. They want to talk about your trucks. They want to say, with this. And we've had some of the best come, take their time to come visit you. And who would ever think that a battalion chief from FDNY would want to come and say hi to, a bunch of yokos from nowhere land, New Brunswick, right? And the reality, it's all the same.
Yeah, we're just all firefighters, and
we're all firefighters.
Yeah. Awesome.
And we're all leaders because we're firefighters as well.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah. What other questions you got?
I don't know. Would you have anything leadership advice for any younger guys that would pass on before we close this up or anything?
Yeah, I think the key about leadership is that it's really context dependent.
Okay.
Right. And I think if you realize that we're all leaders, I think that's the big thing to take away. Yeah. And it starts with leading yourself.
Yeah, knowing yourself. 100%.
Right?
Yeah.
You have to lead yourself. Yeah. Right? And what does that mean? It means that if you have certain roles and responsibilities as a junior firefighter, then you have to be the best at those. And that's your responsibility. And if you can't lead yourself to stay fit, if you can't, to know your skills, to practice, to study, to make yourself competent, right? If you can't do that, how can you lead other people? Because each time you move up, there's a whole other layer of responsibility that you're going to get. And I think it starts off right at the beginning with yourself, is that you have to learn to lead yourself.
Yes.
Right? And if you lead yourself, what ends up happening is that when you go to that next layer, we're eliminating the variables because now you're good at those basic skill sets, right? You can get on the truck quick and put your gear on within 2 minutes or whatever the standard with the stopwatch is. You don't have to think about masking up anymore. Right? But if you're in charge of making a call, doing a 360, figuring out what division you make entry in on this structure, and you're still fumbling with your mask, you failed yourself when you were a junior firefighter because that should be an automatic response. That's something you shouldn't be thinking about anymore. Right? And I think that, that each layer that you go up to is that don't try to be the fire chief. No. Your time will come. But just worry about being really good at what your responsibilities are now. And if you lead yourself, and then when you get to that next job, which is a driver, be the best driver. Yes. Know that truck inside and out. When your officer goes, I need this or I need that or whatever, you know exactly where it is and what to do. And you know that truck, and you gotta tap that with a hammer, and that valve never comes off without a spanner, and you know that in and out. Then and that's so you're still leading yourself, but you're leading that position. Yeah,
and you're setting an example because even you always want to learn the next job ahead of you too, right?
Right.
And you also want to teach the guy below you your job.
Right.
And I think that's where a lot of leadership comes in, and is taking that responsibility onto yourself, and exactly what you're saying, to be the best at your role and to learn the next one up and teach the guy below you.
Right. Yeah. And being a mentor, and that's why I asked about, what do you think leadership is? And the reason why I asked that question is that because leadership is not a position, right? Your rank and your position is your position. Yeah. Leadership is what you're doing with it. And, we have guys that didn't go through the promotional process. No. That doesn't mean they're any less leaders, right? And what ends up happening is like you said, if you're really good at what you're doing and confident enough that you're actually mentoring those under you, you are leading. Yeah. Right. And I think it takes I'm still listening to, I'm talking about retirement with my wife, right? You know what I mean? Like this is my conversations in my life. And you know what I'm doing? I'm still listening to leadership podcasts.
Yeah.
Right? Because I don't think you're going to ever figure it out, and there's no right or wrong. And anybody who was a good leader than your perception in the past, what you do is that you don't mimic them. You're grabbing really good qualities and characteristics from all kinds of different leaders to make it your own. Yeah. And I think that what happens is that when we do, you know, as we move out those layers, you kind of have to sort out the bottom layer before you go to the next layer. Yeah. And that's why when people go up the ranks too quick, that's why they get challenged, is because they really didn't have enough time to kind of master their responsibilities at the previous level. Yeah. So when we get a little bit, you know, say, impatient with the promotional process or opportunity process. Yeah. But I think as a leader, you know, as a junior leader, I think you have to lead yourself, right? Or junior person, junior firefighter. But I think the number one role that I have to say, if I'm going to sum up leadership, is that my job as a leader, if I did it or not, I'm yet to be judged, right? Is to provide opportunities for those that I support. Yeah. Now, if they walk through the door or not, that's up to them. Yeah. But my job is to clear that path, remove those barriers, and give them opportunities. And every chief officer that I've served with, as a chief officer or as a firefighter, has given me opportunities, right? And I think that if you have those opportunities, and hopefully I've given those opportunities in the past. And one of the major reasons why I left the fire service and went into the private sector was because it was an unbelievable opportunity to start a brand new program that hasn't been touched yet. And my wife, you know, summed it up very quickly, because, you know, like I said, for every firefighter, there's a wife or a husband that's supporting that firefighter that is all in the game too, unfortunately, right? And one of the things is that about those opportunities is that my wife asks the same question every time when I'm struggling with a decision. Will that opportunity be there 3 years from now? Yeah. I said, absolutely not. She goes, you answer your question. Now, opportunities come, but opportunities go. Yeah. Right? So, you know, when you're seeing those opportunities, or as a leader, you're providing those opportunities, what happens is that it's really up to the individual whether or not they go or no go. But your job is to create those opportunities so people have that ability to become leaders and move forward. Yeah, 100%. I agree with that. Yeah. Yeah. So even today, leading yourself, right? You know, we're still, in my brain, I'm still a young firefighter at heart, and the same things, right? You know, I still lead myself every day. You know, you try to stay healthy, you know, you try to be a good, you know, good father and husband, and all that other stuff. So leadership really changes from like a workplace leadership perspective, but the reality is that leadership always spills over into your life as well. Family. Family the other day, right? You know, and I look at my sons, right? And if I'm to measure my leadership as a father, right, then they're bigger, stronger, faster, smarter than I am. And they're way ahead of their careers than I was when I were their age. So to me, that's a success, because I've given them those opportunities moving forward, and they are what they are today. Because you're an effective leader, that's why. Yeah, well. I think you are. I've always looked up to you, and I always thought you were going to be the next chief for sure. But and I don't blame you. You took an opportunity to do something. So yeah, and I think that we need to be challenged too, right? It comes back to leading yourself, right? You know, and I think if we're not setting goals and we're not being challenged as an individual, then we're not growing. And if you're not growing, you're dying. So you're stagnant. Yep, I agree with that 100%. Yeah, for sure. I want to thank you so much for what you're doing here, Lucas. And I think, you know, full disclosure, right? Full disclosure, right? You know, when you were putting out those podcasts, and I'm looking at them going, these are really serious, right? Like not the podcast, I should say, the posts that you put on social media or whatever. And I'm like going, wow, like he's saying some pretty deep stuff here. He's like, you know, self-awareness and this and that. And I'm going, and that's leadership in itself as well. Right. And doing that. And I actually reached out to you and I was like, everything okay?
Yeah, no.
Right? You're not going down a dark hole on me, are you? Because you're talking about some pretty serious stuff here. And you said, no, man, everything is great. And this is a really good way for me to process and pass on. And that itself is leadership as well, right? And I think that's really, really important. And having these opportunities for discussion, you know what? Do I know anything about leadership? Absolutely not. I read a bunch of books. I had some experiences, but I'm just, you know, I'm just like any other firefighter that went through the service. It is what it is. But if there's something that you provided me an opportunity to voice my opinion, and it may all be, everybody's like, yeah, okay, whatever. But if one person takes that and goes, you know what, he's actually right on that. Like, I'm going to look into that because that makes a little bit of sense. Then that's how the whole thing kind of goes. And
I just want to pass something on that maybe, whoever says maybe somebody's struggling or, been through the same things I've been through, maybe they can relate with it. Maybe it'll help them. That's kind of really
absolutely.
I do all this stuff. So
yeah, I'm proud of you.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
All right.
That was my car.
Thanks.